Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. And this is definitely a World War III alert, y'all. A World War III alert. And that's Putin has to save the Christians from the head choppers backed by NATO, the group formerly known as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Listen, we got to get right into this. This is a very serious situation. NATO, I discussed some of this yesterday, but we got to keep our eyes on this because this is where the war is at now. Al-Qaeda is being backed by the U.S. All over TV, they calling them the opposition and who? The head choppers? They call them rebels. The terrorists? Freedom fighters? You talking about those who enslaved black people and sold them in cages? These guys, never forget this. Never forget, these people are the same people when they was in Libya. They were selling our people. You asked us for sale in Libya. These are the same damn people, and the media, fake news should be ashamed of themselves. So should some of these Arab stations like Al Jazeera. Once again, Al Jazeera to show they motherfucking hand. They're backing ISIS too. And they where to get their hands on some Christians. If you're a Christian, they definitely gonna cut your head off. That's serious business.
Undoubtedly, the Syrian Arab Army and its allies are starting a surprise counterattack operation, crushing the rebels who are trying to attack Aleppo and Idlib. The Russian Reconciliation Center in Syria reported on the joint Russian-Syrian activities of launching missile and bomb strikes on the equipment and personnel of illegal armed groups, command posts, warehouses, and artillery positions of the rebels. Videos circulated online of the current situation on November 30th, 2024, showing an ambush of a column of rebel armored vehicles, which were planning to advance and join the rebel groups in Tal Rifat, north of Aleppo. The Syrian security forces reported that a series of powerful strikes by Syrian Air Force warplanes destroyed dozens of vehicles, with real losses. The sudden escalation of the rebels to Aleppo should not have happened, but it seems that it will soon be resolved by the Syrian government. The city has not fallen. Russian and Syrian aircraft continue to actively bomb enemy positions on the outskirts of the city. It seems that this time things are not going well for them, the radical and extremist groups supported by foreign powers.
Now, BBC, Sky News, CNN, Al Jazeera. If you look on news, they're celebrating ISIS and Al-Qaeda right now. It is so disgusting. They're celebrating ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The world, but when I go into the comment sections of all those news stations, the people woke. The people like, are y'all actually cheering ISIS and Al-Qaeda? We know these people renamed themselves. But we do know this is still ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the head choppers. They're backing them, rooting them on, calling them opposition figures. You talking about Bin Laden them? Man, come on.
Fighter jets launched precision strikes, a series of carpet bombings against the SNA and HTS group.
2024, everybody getting exposed. The U.S. just say the hell with it. We backing the Nazis in Ukraine. We don't give a damn if you say we love Hitler. We gonna back ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria and chop off the Christian's head. We don't give a damn if you know it's us. This is crazy.
And the consequences were fatal for the targets. Another clip shows the moment when the HTS FSA group convoy was surprised by a joint Russian and Syrian attack, which came suddenly and even caused their footage to spontaneously cut off. Russia announced that it had carried out airstrikes targeting rebel attacks and eliminating
all these. You see, that's how you know this is the CIA pawns. Why these people ain't been fighting Israel? Huh? Why these people not fighting Israel, and why Israel haven't been bombing these specific fighters? Boy, this is crazy, man. Huh? Why they ain't been helping the Palestinians? Why they ain't been helping Hezbollah? Why they not helping the Houthi rebels? Huh? Why they not standing up with the Iraqi militias who fighting Israel? Why everybody is fighting Israel except these certain groups who is ISIS and Al-Qaeda once again and expose their goddamn hand. These the fighters of the U.S. and Benjamin Netanyahu, who they want to attack Israel and Israel won't attack them.
More than 200 of their members in the past 24 hours in Syria. It is worth noting the consequences of this counterattack operation.
Well, they messed up. They finna bring this whole dirty war back into everybody's view. And I remember this war. I've studied this war. I've been telling y'all about this Syrian war because it happened at the same time they overthrew Gaddafi. You see, they just didn't get to finish. They didn't get to do Assad because Putin stepped in because they was chopping off the heads of the Christians. And he already had a base there that was going to get overthrown. So he had to step in. Once General Suleiman flew to Russia, that's why they killed Suleiman, because he flew to Russia and told Russia, you got to step in now. All of the Christians going to get killed. All Christians was getting killed and beheaded in Syria, bro. That's a fact. That's a fact. If you black, your ass better kneel and say you love them and take and say the prophet is nobody's better than the prophet, and you take their form of Islam and you be their slave and any woman. These people was kidnapping women like the Arab slave trade back in the day. That's serious business. Huh? But now that they losing all over the world, this was but I gotta give it to them. They always got an ace up their sleeve. They never gonna go quietly into the night. I'm talking about the Zionists, the small hats, the U.S. imperialists.
Operation were very terrible, causing many rebels to be killed in many areas at the entrance to the city of Aleppo. In addition, air targeting destroyed a military convoy of the al-Nusra group in the al-Basel roundabout.
That's a fact.
The Syrian Ministry of Defense reported that the course of the Syrian Armed Forces operation continues to reinforce the area with equipment and soldiers to prevent rebel violations and ward off their aggression.
These are racist motherfuckers. That's serious business. These some racist motherfuckers. They can't stand black people. They ones trying to conquer Africa. They ones call themselves, they go to Africa and then call themselves Al-Shabaab or Boko Haram and kidnap young black girls, turn them into sex slaves, make the young boys become part of their armies. These are the motherfuckers that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, they fighting against. These bastards right here. This is time to put them out their goddamn misery. Don't let them run back to Africa neither. Putin, wipe them out right there. But Putin is giving them a heavy-handed response because he already know. He already know he can't play with these killers, man. No, they not playing. And they getting pumped up with some of that new military drugs. They don't feel no pain. That's serious business. They don't feel same as the Ukrainians. They don't feel no fear. They don't feel pain unless they dead. That's serious business. That's why they be fighting so hard.
The conflict in Syria has escalated dramatically, with the Russian military declaring a full-scale combat posture against what it calls terrorist groups following a bold and unexpected counteroffensive by a coalition of moderate rebels and the National Free Syrian Army.
Nah, ain't no moderate rebels. I'm gonna clear it up. Some of these videos, I don't know why this dude is even doing that. Some of these videos they're telling, ain't no moderate rebels in Syria, nigga. Fuck that. No, they not. No, they not. The moderate ones is with the Syrian government, and they trying to vote and to get things done. Everybody with guns and bombs and grenades, them is radicals who racist, who kill Gaddafi and put black people in cages. This they homeless right here. That's a fact. These ain't no moderates.
This coalition, reportedly comprising fighters from across Asia and Eastern Europe, has captured significant strategic locations in Aleppo province within just days of the offensive. Despite Russia's powerful response, including widespread airstrikes on rebel logistics and supply lines, the rebel forces have continued their advance, with reports suggesting they have penetrated parts of Aleppo city itself. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov condemned the attacks, describing them as a violation of Syria's sovereignty, while expressing optimism that the Assad government would regain control.
Supporting the Syrian Arab army, Russian aerospace forces have conducted missile and bombing raids on hardware and manpower of illegal armed groups, command centers, and artillery positions of terrorists.
Once again, Iran got to stop playing motherfucking games, man. That's serious business, nigga. Iran need to send 20, 30,000, 50, 60,000 soldiers, troops to Syria. Russia can't be doing everything all over the fucking world, man. That's what they trying to do. They're trying to drain Putin's resources, kill off all his men. Putin's had to send his troops to Africa to help put Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger and them brothers, and just brought in Chad on their feet, which is a good thing. But Iran supposed to be a big dog in the Middle East. He supposed to be helping the Shiite Crescent, and Syria is part of that. Iran has to step in with his troops and his hardware and take care of motherfucking business. They ain't too locked in with Israel trading missiles. That ain't shit. Russia got a big war going on in Ukraine. If Iran don't step up the fucking plate, nigga, Syria could fall. You know what I'm saying? This is not no game, man. Iran need to handle this motherfucking business, man. They already done let Hezbollah almost get wiped out. Iran just act like they worried about only if they get attacked, then they gonna, go all out. Nah, fuck that shit, man.
Last 24 hours, at least 200 militants were eliminated. The operation to
Iran
repel
better
the
show up for this
extremists'
battle,
aggression
man.
continues.
However, the rapid territorial gains made by the rebels indicate that restoring stability will be a far more difficult task than anticipated. Rebel forces claim to have seized 56 villages in Aleppo's western countryside in a single day, a striking development that marks one of the most significant advances by opposition forces since a fragile truce was broken by Russia and Turkey in 2020. The offensive has also seen the rebels reportedly capture 400 square kilometers of territory and heavy weaponry from the Syrian army. The renewed violence has been attributed primarily to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS,
that's ISIS,
formerly aligned with Al-Qaeda,
that's
alongside its allied factions.
See, don't listen to none of these new names. They go, I don't want to play these games. That's ISIS and Al-Qaeda rebranded as different names. That's ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That's the same group, same head choppers, same ones in Syria, ripping people's hearts out, eating it live on tape. Come on, these bastards. And hate black people. They think we supposed to be their slaves, bro. That's serious business. Y'all can do a whole live on that. That's why they try to make Africans subservient to them and try to use Islam to do it. That's serious business, man.
Groups have launched a coordinated offensive from Idlib province, a region dominated by opposition forces under Turkey's influence. In response, the Syrian military has counterattacked, reclaiming some 20 villages and launching airstrikes on key rebel positions, including a reported strike on a headquarters in the northern town of Mer. The government's ability to push back the rebels in some areas underscores its reliance on superior air power, bolstered by Russian support. Russia's decision to increase its involvement in the conflict signals its determination to secure its ally, President Bashar al-Assad, and to prevent any erosion of its influence in Syria. The timing of this renewed engagement reflects broader geopolitical concerns. Moscow may view the resurgence of rebel forces as a proxy challenge by Western powers, including the United States, Turkey, and Israel, aimed at...
It's very genius move that the CIA just did. Israel is on the ropes, losing too much armory, wasting too much bullets, losing too many bodies. Ukraine on the ropes. They getting kicked out of one African nation after the other one. Another Chad just kicked them out. That's all over the news. I have to cover that. They joining the revolutionary trio of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. So it's only smart for NATO and Israel to use the terrorists, the head choppers, to fight their enemies while they regroup. But on the news, they're getting all of the campaigning like it's not terrorists, like it's honorable people fighting against these governments. This is disgusting, man. These the same individuals claiming they was attacking Russia, and they was claiming them. They were saying it was ISIS, Qassan, These are terrorists. chopping off people's heads in Africa and stuff like that. That's them, this them. You see? Disgusting.
At undermining Assad's regime. This development threatens to destabilize Russia's strategic foothold in the Middle East and could potentially disrupt the balance.
I don't want to hear no excuses out of Iran. No excuses. I don't want to hear you might be finna woulda, coulda, shoulda. Nigga, all your allies is under pressure and Russia can't do everything. That's serious motherfucking business, man. Iran looking very suspect once again, bro. That's serious business. If they supposed to be immediately. This been going on 2-3 days. They supposed to immediately done sent 30,000-40,000 troops to Syria. What the hell are you waiting on?
Power in the region. The challenges facing the Syrian government forces are numerous. Years of economic hardship have taken a toll on the military's readiness and morale, compounded by the complacency that followed earlier victories against opposition forces. The Syrian army also appears to have underestimated the rebels' ability to deploy modern technologies, including FPV drones, which have proven to be a game changer in the conflict. Additionally, the removal of talented but ambitious military commanders in favor of less capable replacements has weakened the chain of command. These commanders, described as fathers to their soldiers, were reportedly sidelined due to internal power struggles and allegations of corruption, leaving the army less cohesive and effective. The city of Aleppo, once Syria's largest urban center and a vital economic hub, remains central to the conflict. Its recapture by Assad's forces in 2016, achieved with decisive Russian assistance, symbolized a turning point in the war. However, the latest rebel advances suggest the battle for Aleppo is far from over. Videos circulating on social media reportedly show tanks and heavy artillery in Aleppo's city center, a stark reminder of the high stakes involved. While these videos remain unverified, they underscore the tense and volatile situation. The ability of the rebels to stage such a well-coordinated and effective offensive hints at significant preparation and resources, challenging the notion that opposition forces have been weakened over the years. Their capture of heavy weaponry from Syrian military units further highlights vulnerabilities within government defenses. This resurgence raises difficult questions about the effectiveness of current strategies employed by the Syrian government and its allies to maintain control over contested regions. The escalation of fighting in Syria also highlights the fragile nature of the 2020 ceasefire agreements. While Turkey has maintained a military presence in northern Syria and supported opposition factions, its role in the recent developments is likely to come under scrutiny from Russia. The uneasy alliance between Moscow and Ankara, which has so far managed to balance their competing interests in Syria, now faces renewed strain as the conflict deepens. Russia's intensified involvement in Syria comes at a time when its military is already stretched due to commitments in Ukraine. Prolonged engagement in Syria risks depleting resources and could lead to greater international criticism, particularly if civilian casualties from airstrikes increase. This challenge adds a layer of complexity to Russia's strategic calculations as it seeks to project strength without overextending itself. Insert. The situation in Aleppo continues to evolve as moderate rebel forces are reportedly expanding their presence in the western part of the city, with limited clashes reported against the Syrian army. A recently emerged video, while not showing active combat, suggests that the rebels have managed to establish themselves inside Aleppo, further consolidating their hold on strategic positions. Meanwhile, reports indicate that Russia has resumed heavy bombing of rebel-controlled areas.
You see, who is this? Open-minded thinker. You see, this guy, this Islamic guy, open-minded thinker, you like Al Jazeera. I ain't really bringing no more of his shit on here. I already see what you cooking. Rebel this, opposition fighter that. You ain't said terrorist one goddamn time, brother. You know, trying to make this some honorable story, but it's not. It's racist bastards who want to put us back in bondage. That's a fact, like they did in Libya. You see, that Al Jazeera and this guy, they don't mind talking about what Israel doing in Palestine. But I watch Al Jazeera as they talk about different stories in Africa. Boy, I'd be so racist. And they always slanting towards the head choppers. You know, let me get this dude on my goddamn TV. No, we don't want to hear no propaganda, bro. These ain't no goddamn honorable freedom fighters. All right. Hold on. That's why we got to look at this. We got to look deep into this. See, Trump got to put in this type of shit now. Trump already told us Barack Obama and Hillary was behind ISIS. Oh, really, Trump? Well, then you going to be backing ISIS too?
Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Bobby Challenge. And if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, the other day we were talking about the ceasefire in Lebanon and Netanyahu's exuberant, triumphant celebration of the ceasefire. Basically, he's ended the two-front war that Israel has been forced to fight with Hezbollah's retreat north of the Litani River. And even as he was speaking, he issued a warning to Syria. And he said, Syria is playing with fire. And then lo and behold, within the last couple of days, the civil war in Syria that has been more or less put on the back burner for some years now has reignited with serious, massive offensives waged by the HTS, which is just simply an offshoot of ISIS, which itself is just an offshoot of Al Qaeda. It's the same bunch of Islamists that just keep giving themselves new names, and it's evidently quite a serious fight that's going on, and you have to think that this is a second front that has been opened up against Syria and against Russia. And so, here's just a sampling of the media coverage. And here we have the report in CNN. Syria's rebels exploit weaknesses in Iran's proxies to launch surprise offensive. And then anti-government rebels in northern Syria have launched a sudden offensive in an effort to capitalize on Israel's efforts to weaken Iran's regional proxies. After making only limited gains in recent years, they have already captured some 40 towns and villages that were controlled by government forces, as well as Syrian military base. Coming together for an anti-regime operation, rebels from various factions closed in on Syria's second largest cities, Aleppo. Aleppo has been controlled by Assad's government and pro-Iranian militias since 2016. I mean, clearly Hezbollah has been weakened, and that's had an effect on the situation in Syria. And again, Hezbollah, which the Americans frothing at the mouth, was actually fighting against these Islamists effectively, as was, of course, Iran. So then analysts say the rebels are using a vacuum left by a weakened Hezbollah to advance in Syria. And then here we have some guy from the International Crisis Group. The rebels see an opportunity to test the front lines with Hezbollah weakened, a pressured Iran, and a Russia busy with Ukraine. The rebels were surprised by their success, and they pushed harder than they anticipated. This is Nana Hawak. The rebels see a shift in powers. And here's the BBC. It says, rebel forces have launched a major offensive in northwestern Syria, capturing territory from President Bashar al-Assad's forces for the first time in years. The Islamist militant group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and allied factions said they had seized control of a number of towns and villages in Aleppo and Idlib provinces since Wednesday. The Syrian military said its forces were confronting a large-scale attack by terrorists and inflicting heavy losses on them. So,
it's interesting. They, again, in this narrative. So these rebels are against the Assad government and against Iran. But who is supporting these Islamic groups? Okay, it's never mentioned. Where do they get arms? Who monies them?
That's
Blue
right.
tribes, never mentioned. Never mentioned. They just exist.
They just exist. Exactly. They yeah. It's very interesting because again, Idlib province. Well, that's run by Turkey. Turkey is a NATO member. Why have they survived in Idlib? Well, they've survived against Idlib because Turkey has essentially threatened Syria that if you try and take Idlib, we're going to attack you. Syria obviously can't fight against Turkey. And then the Americans, remember the time when there were threats to take Idlib? The Americans threatened, and that was under Trump. The Americans threatened essentially to bomb Assad. You know, if he did anything against Idlib. So who's protecting this enclave of jihadi terrorists?
Yeah, and also Erdogan has a dilemma on his hands, because if this were this terrorist enclave were to be threatened, where would these people go? They'll go to Turkey, and he does not want.
No, he does not. He does not want, exactly.
He doesn't want these people.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Exactly. He could, of course, unleash them on the Europeans, which he often threatens to do.
Always an option.
Always an option. And then Idlib is the last remaining opposition stronghold, and is home to more than 4 million people, many of whom have been displaced during the conflict and are living in dire conditions.
You know, and Idlib is the last remaining opposition stronghold. That's so anodyne, isn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, what this last remaining opposition? You mean the people that cut off heads?
Exactly. Opposition. Yes, the opposition. You know, the leader of the opposition.
This is just, you know, Solzhenitsyn
Yeah,
with a Kalashnikov.
Exactly. That's
no
right.
damn opposition. Racist enslavers.
It is kind of amazing that they never spell out, oh, the HTS. What is the HTS? This is basically, you know, this is just Al Qaeda, ISIS. They just simply give themselves new names, but it's the same bunch of people.
That's disgusting.
And who's been protecting
openly backing Al Qaeda?
I mean, why has you know, after all, they've obviously got a hell of a lot of arms, because they're right on the border, and Turkey makes sure that that they're kept armed and supplied. And of course, there's also the other parts of Syria that are under occupation. They don't really mention that. You know, you've got the Kurds, who just basically set up their own autonomous province under American auspices. Of course, the Americans are there occupying Syria. So, and then of course Israel,
and the rationale to keep troops in Iraq, because they have to support the occupation of Syria.
Yeah, exactly. And then the enclave is mostly controlled by HTS, but Turkish-backed rebel factions operating under the banner of the Syrian National Army and Turkish forces are also based there. But again, it's strange that they never really ask, why are Turkish forces based there? I mean, were they invited in by the government in Damascus? You know, well, they're all Turkish forces. They're just not based there. I mean, why wouldn't they be based there? And again, even when they say the American, oh, well, American forces are stationed in Syria. I mean, why are they stationed in Syria?
Yeah, by invitation, of course, right.
That's right. And then we have, in 2020, Turkey and Russia, a staunch ally of Assad. They always put that in. Oh, a staunch ally of Assad. They never say about, you know, anyone else who's a staunch ally of HTS. Brokered a ceasefire to halt a push by the government to retake Idlib. That led to an extended lull in violence, but sporadic clashes, airstrikes, and shelling continued. And then last month, the UN Special Envoy for Syria warned that the wars in Gaza and Lebanon appear to be catalyzing conflict in northwest Syria in a dangerous manner. Geir Peterson said HTS carried out a significant raid into government-held areas. Russia had resumed airstrikes for the first time in months, and pro-government forces had significantly accelerated drone strikes and shelling.
So remember, everyone, the legal regime in Damascus wants to rid the country of foreign occupiers. That's never mentioned by the
No,
BBC.
no, exactly. That's right. And then on Wednesday, HTS and its allies said they launched their offensive to deter aggression. Of course, they deter aggression and thwart enemies' plans, accusing the government and allied Iran-backed militias of escalation and aggression in Northwest. There's this wonderful neutrality, the aggression in the Northwest. Basically, the government is engaging in aggression against itself. But it came as the Syrian government and its allies were preoccupied with other conflicts. And then in neighboring Lebanon, an Israeli military campaign has devastated the Iran-backed Hezbollah movement, whose fighters helped turn the tide of the Syrian civil war. Israel has also stepped up its airstrikes inside Syria on targets linked to Iran, Hezbollah, and other Iran-backed militia groups, while Russian forces are focused on the war in Ukraine. So what you're doing is Israel again is helping out the jihadis. Though no doubt we'll be told by the Israel firsters about how Israel is in the front line fighting against Islamism and Islamic terrorism. But clearly the people who are fighting against Islamic terrorism are the ones who are targeted by Israel.
Well, I mean, considering the spigot that will never be turned off. I mean, why isn't Israel attacking Islamists in Syria? I mean, it's a civilizational conflict, isn't it? I mean, it's right on your border.
Right, exactly. No, yeah. No one ever asked that question. And then at the end of the first day of the offensive, the rebels had advanced into western Aleppo countryside, taking them within 10 kilometers from the outskirts of Aleppo, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. It reported that they had seized the Syrian Army's 46 regiments base and at least 8 villages. And then on Thursday, the monitoring group said the rebels had cut the M5 highway between Aleppo and the capital, Damascus. And then this observatory said 121 rebels, most of them members of the HTS, 40 government troops, and 21 militiamen had been killed over the past 2 days. And then again, the rebels said in the telegram statement that they had seized the town of Khan al-Asai, which is 5 kilometers west of Aleppo city, and had killed more than 200 members of pro-government forces. And then the Syrian military statement said its forces had confronted the terrorist attack that is still ongoing with various weapons and in cooperation with friendly forces, leaving heavy losses in equipment and so on.
So many words, so many
words. Sort of words.
But where's Israel in all of this?
That's right. And then look who makes their appearance. Oh, the white helmets. Meanwhile, the Syrian civil defense, whose first responders are known as the White Helmets, said on Thursday the Syrian and Russian warplanes had struck a residential neighborhoods. Of course, residential neighborhood, yeah. And shops in the opposition-controlled town of Atareb, 20 kilometers west of Aleppo, killing 14 civilians, including 3 children and 2 women. So they always get the white helmets in to make their propaganda points. It also reported that 4 civilians had been killed in Darat Izza. Another civilian was hit by a rocket attack on a camp for displaced people near Bab al-Fawa, crossing on the Turkish border. And then here we have the Financial Times. Attack, Syrian rebels launch major offensive against Bashar al-Assad's regime. Again, rebels. They're the rebels.
So
Heroic rebels.
We have opposition, we have rebels, we have this,
That's right. They're rebels. They want to provide, for their people. Unexpected advance towards Aleppo aims to capitalize on increased pressure on Damascus. And then Syrian Islamist rebels have launched their biggest offensive in years against President Bashar al-Assad's forces, capturing at least 15 villages and killing a senior Iranian commander as they surged towards the city of Aleppo.
And this is a good thing, right?
Exactly. In the first serious challenge for 4 years to Assad and his backers, Russia and Iran, militants advanced eastward from the remaining Syrian opposition-held region of Idlib, which has been in a state of stalemate since Moscow and Ankara agreed to ceasefire in 2020.
So in 2 paragraphs, we go back, George, just real quick. So at the top, we have Islamist rebels.
Yep.
The second one, we have
Yep.
militant.
That's right. That's right. And then it says so HDS, the ruling militant group in northwestern Syrian region, is listed as a terrorist organization by the U.S. State Department. But of course, we all know that they list things as terrorist organizations, but they nonetheless support them. You know, you basically facilitate everything that they do, but you give yourself cover by listing them as a terrorist organization.
It means they're not invited to the buffets.
Exactly. The territory held by HTS and other factions has been the last remaining patch of opposition-held land. So it's the opposition. Since Assad, backed by Iran and Russia, crushed the rebellion that grew out of the country's 2011 popular uprising.
Which wasn't popular.
It wasn't popular. The media office of HDS's Syrian Salvation Government claimed that the militants had taken 100 square kilometers of territory since launching the attack. And then the advance shows how the balance of power between forces in civil war-racked Syria has been altered by a year of conflict in the wider Middle East. While Assad brutally crushed Syria's armed uprising, he's under pressure.
Well, you know, Financial Times, I mean, while Assad brutally crushed Syria's armed uprising, well, that's what the state does.
Right.
Against
it does.
It does.
It has since time immemorial. I mean, yes.
Okay, yes. I don't know who writes these things.
You're right. You're absolutely right. These are, you know, the same people who talk about Trump's insurrection. We have to crush the insurrection, but apparently he brutally put down the armed uprising. He's under pressure on multiple fronts and presiding over a shattered nation that has become an arena for great power competition.
Well, how did that happen, George? Okay.
How did that? Yes. How did that happen? Well, exactly. But they never talk about that. How did that happen?
Oh, who shattered the nation?
Who shattered it?
Okay.
It never said, well, 2011. Now, what happened after 2011? Yes. The Obama administration, Hillary Clinton started transporting arms from Libya into Syria. Now, why did they do that? Why would they transport arms from Libya after having bombed Libya into submission? They start transferring arms and militants from Libya into Syria. Why would they do that? But that's never mentioned. And John Kerry's admission, yeah, we were seeking to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. He said it. And then, well, yeah, but that never appears. It's just, there's great power competition. Was it not great power competition?
Oh, no. John Kerry's admission is that they wanted a black flag over Damascus. Yes, that's what they wanted. Okay. And they still have plenty of people that will do their bidding there.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then they saved Idlib. They went and saved it. I mean, that time when they made that threat to take Idlib, Erdogan, he went to the United Nations and started pleading about, oh my God, they're going to attack Idlib. And all the usual suspects, the British and the Americans, all basically supported Erdogan and threatened Syria with with serious consequences if they tried to take Idlib. Tehran-backed militia groups and Russian forces have propped up Assad's regime, propped it up, while Turkey has backed rebels in the last bastion of opposition-held territory, and a small number of U.S. troops remain in eastern Syria to support the fight against ISIS.
They haven't been doing for years.
which they don't do. They haven't done it, but then for a small number, and it's just this fight against ISIS, which is completely non-existent, and they haven't do it. But it's just a small number, just small. But which is there, why are you there? Oh, well, we're fighting against ISIS. Oh, okay, well, that's fine. So what are you doing? I'm fighting against ISIS. Oh.
Well, there was no such thing as ISIS before the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2000.
Right. That's
So, I mean, this is, why could there be ISIS in Syria? Because Americans are there.
Exactly. And it's wonderful because no one ever inquires into it about, because that's the Americans' excuse. Why are you occupying Syria? You're not there by invitation of the Syrian government. You're not there by invitation of the United Nations. So what exactly are you doing in Syria? Oh, we're fighting against ISIS. Oh, well,
yeah, but so is the Assad government is fighting ISIS. So why doesn't the United States help Assad?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Why doesn't it help? And of course, Iran and Hezbollah were fighting against ISIS.
And Soleimani was the greatest killer of people like that.
That's right. So they're the enemy. They're the enemy is of course Iran and Hezbollah. That's and Assad and the Russians. In other words, all the people who are fighting against ISIS. Those are the people that you're against, and you want to persuade the world that you're fighting ISIS. And the media just repeat this. They just absolutely repeat this without any question. The Israeli military has been striking weapons depots and Iran-linked militants in Syria regularly since Palestinian militant group Hamas attacked Israel on October the 7th last year. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday warned Assad that he's playing with fire. So he warned on Tuesday, and then Wednesday...
So said the arsonist. Yeah,
exactly. So said the arsonist. What a surprise. He says it on Tuesday, and Wednesday, suddenly they launch this offensive. For the Syrian rebels, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Again, this is the guy in the crisis group. When else are you going to ever get the world, the US and Israel, and everyone else going after their rivals? Well, that doesn't come about by accident. I mean, he says this as if somehow, an accident. No, this is a deliberate policy. They did this in 2011 and 2012, and they're restarting this again. The Syrian rebels began their offensive the day after Israel agreed to cease fire with Hezbollah, following 2 months of intense airstrikes and an invasion of southern Lebanon. Again, it's very interesting. They say these 2 months of airstrikes on Syria. Has Syria attacked Israel? I mean, is that has Syria done anything other than, of course, it had to sit on its hands because Israel stole land from Syria, which supposedly the Europeans are upset. Right? Golan Heights, according to UN Resolution 242, Golan Heights belongs to Syria. We strongly oppose this violation of Resolution 242. And yet, strangely enough, the Europeans do nothing about it. They just sort of said, well, hey, they annexed the Golan Heights. Well, okay, what's next? The offensive all comes despite signs of a potential rapprochement between Ankara and Damascus, with Turkey's President Erdogan in July saying he hoped to meet Assad for the first time in more than a decade. Turkey controls a swathe of northern Syria that extends beyond Idlib and contains smaller rebel factions. Well, Erdogan, you don't want to believe anything Erdogan says. He's always just sniffing out these opportunities. But the rebel advance also suggested that Ankara judged its efforts to revive relations with Damascus had stalled. And then so it appears that the understanding was in Ankara that normalization has failed, and they gave the green light for this offensive. This is some Turkish academic. So what this tells us is that the ceasefire in Lebanon, which was, no question, it's a setback for Hezbollah, has now been seized on by Israel, by Israel's de facto allies, by America's de facto allies, to make another push for against Damascus and give the Russians headaches once again in Syria.
And it also proves an important point is that Hezbollah played a very important role
Right.
in fighting Islamic terrorism in Syria. And now, obviously, they are very much preoccupied. And this is no coincidence. They want to pick up the baton where they left it off, this
Right.
time without the effective fighting force of Hezbollah. Hezbollah gave blood a lot in Syria.
Right.
It's underestimated. They did a lot in fighting Islamic terrorism. And now they're on the back foot, obviously. And so this is an opportunity. We had Vanessa Beeley on not too long ago, and she predicted this. She said the new front is Syria. She's right.
Right. Exactly. That it's a new front. And, it's very interesting that here they are. In the media, they're reporting in this very neutral way about the advance of these, these
it's not even
jihadis.
neutral, it's vacuous.
Yes, and these are the head choppers. These are the head choppers who are making these advances, and all Iran,
These are the racist
Iran, Damascus. You're basically facilitating the head choppers. And well, it's good. Russia's setback for Russia, so that's a good thing for us. Yes, but it's clear that this is how they plan on reorganizing the Middle East. And these people, these Mike Waltz and the rest of them who are coming into power, they are absolutely gung-ho. I mean, we remember them from the days of the height of the Syrian war. They're absolutely determined to get Bashar al-Assad out. I think they will restart that whole regime change war in Damascus. And again,
well, and also, I mean, again, this is part of the game plan. Is that focusing the attention against the evil Assad, Putin's best friend in the Middle East, as the genocide continues in Gaza. Very convenient, very convenient. Okay. Well, the Israelis and Hezbollah licked their wounds. A new front is opened up to, again, change the narrative, change what we're talking about. And we're talking about it, so it's succeeding. But I mean, this reordering, this is something George and I have talked about ever since the infamous day of October 7th. This is an opportunity for many to reorganize the entire Middle East. And the steam for that project it hasn't abated at all.
Right. No, I think that's right. And it's very interesting because, of course, Syria has always been part of the rejectionist front. From Israel's and Americans' perspective, it's a small country, but nonetheless, it's a great nuisance. It's something that's a problem for them. And Israel, has taken land from Syria, and Syria continues to make this claim: you have stolen land from us, land that is, according to UN resolutions, belongs to us. And therefore, it's a daily living reminder to Israel of its violations of international law.
It's interesting, though, and George and I can very easily remember it. It wasn't that long ago. I mean, if you're 25, then it was a long time ago. But Syria was a power broker in the Middle East. Now it's a shell of itself. Okay, it's amazing. I mean, they controlled Lebanon.
Right. Okay. They controlled Lebanon, and even before that, when Egypt and Syria kind of created a joint state in the great days of Nasser. It was the United Arab Republic, and in fact, it was the Israeli constant provocation against Syria that really triggered the 1967 war. And again, Israel did this deliberately. It continued deliberately to attack Syria, thus forcing, which is what Israel is very good, thus forcing Nasser to have to do something, because ultimately this was a humiliation for Nasser that he wasn't really doing anything to help Syria, which is part of his this joint state. So Syria has been absolutely at the heart of the Middle East for a long time. And again, the relationship with Russia goes all the way back, I think in 1971 or 72, when the Soviet Union and Syria signed their friendship treaty, which has lasted, lasted through the Cold War and into the present day. And that's, again, Russia has bases there, has a port there. That's something that Americans do not want. That because Syria is essentially the means whereby Russia maintains a presence in the Middle East. So Syria is always something that you can keep stirring at appropriate moments.
Yeah. So it's very much part of the fray. That's why this conflict is it'll simmer on until there's another climax. I mean, again, many people and smart people, I think, believe that Iran will retaliate against Israel. So, for the last retaliation. So now Syria is in the fray, but it's broken. It's a shell of itself. And of course, this is going to put pressure on the Russians to will they abandon their ally? I mean,
they can't. I mean, exactly, because it is their ally. I mean, Syria goes down, you lose your position in the Middle East. I mean, that's a given. So the Russians can't abandon Syria. So yeah, absolutely. It's we're always going to open up a second front for you. I mean, that's how the West operates. Yeah, now we've got an opportunity to open up and put Russia into a very difficult position.
And also put Iran, because Syria is very important to Iran, because it's a very important foothold. And the Iranians are Persians primarily, and Syria is their foothold into the Arab Muslim world. So it's very important to them, and that's why it's all happening right now. This is like a bad dream I'm remembering.
Yeah, exactly. We thought we'd kind of forgotten about this,
all this is coming back.
It's coming back. Exactly. I felt that as well. It's like, wow, we're talking about Aleppo again. That is so 2016.
When was Aleppo liberated? Because I remember 2016, Brexit, Trump, Aleppo. I made a program on that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I also remember, and remember those because it was in December 2016, and then there were these photographs on Twitter. They're celebrating Christmas in Aleppo, and it was this lovely sight. These little children wearing Santa costumes, and you think, civilization has returned to Aleppo. The head choppers have been.
Yeah, but I had people on my program saying this. Because I just said that they're celebrating Christmas in Aleppo, and we've seen the pictures here. And one of my guests said, "And you think that's a good idea?" I said, "Yeah, because it's a defeat for your side." Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
Today is December 1st, 2024, as the conflict in Ukraine continues to escalate, as the situation for Ukrainian forces and their Western backers deteriorate. On the battlefield, the U.S. is expanding the conflict not just in and around Ukraine, but elsewhere along Russia's periphery. This is something that I have talked about for years. This is something that we can see now clearly playing out. Most recently, there is an offensive by factions of al-Qaeda backed and armed by the United States. I will provide evidence for all of that here in just a moment. These forces, obviously preparing for months ahead of time, have now launched a very large offensive. They are sweeping down from the north into the very large city of Aleppo and other areas along the line of contact there. As a matter of fact, let's just look at the map. So this is also liveuamap.com, which I regularly refer to in regards to the conflict in Ukraine, as a pro-Western map. You have to keep that in mind. Every single conflict depicted in these maps will represent Western bias. This is Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel. Everything in red is controlled by the Syrian government. These areas here are militants, extremists, and they are surrounding a US base that is actually located there on the border. These dark gray blotches, this is ISIS territory. And in yellow, this is the US military occupation and their Kurdish proxies. They are occupying eastern Syria, and they have for years now. And this latest offensive is emanating out of the Turkish-held buffer zone in northern Syria. So when Russian-backed Syrian forces were retaking all of Syria, the US and Turkey intervened, sent in forces, occupying what was left of militant-held territory to keep the conflict from actually fully ending, to freeze it, essentially. And this is what I have warned the US since the special military operation began in February 2022. I've warned that the US will most likely resort to a very similar strategy in Ukraine. So it's very important to pay attention to how this has played out, to get a glimpse into how it will play out in Ukraine. So these were Turkish, NATO, US-backed, CIA-backed, armed, trained, equipped terrorists, all in this area around Idlib. They are now pushing downward, east and south. This was Aleppo City. Let's just look at the timeline feature. As of November 1st, this is where the line of contact was. And now let's go back to the most recent data. You can see how far they have pushed. This is significant. Aleppo is the second largest city in Syria. This is significant. And even though the green is where this map is confirming militants have seized territory, you can see these icons indicate that they are operating all across the actual city of Aleppo. Now, I've seen a lot of people panicking online in regards to this. You have to remember that before Russia intervened in 2015, almost the entire country was overrun by US-backed terrorists. Almost the entire country, including parts of Damascus. The Syrian government was fighting over parts of Damascus for control between themselves and US-backed terrorists. So it had been many, many times worse. There are a lot of questions as to how this could possibly have happened. Did Syrian, Russian, Iranian intelligence not detect this? Or did they detect this and determine there was really nothing they could do about it? Russia, Syria, Iran are all overstretched by years and years and years of US proxy war and even in some cases direct war. Are they unable to stop this at all? Are they simply accepting that there was no way to stop this initial push, but are fairly confident they can at least stop it and then begin retaking territory? These are all questions that only time can tell. There's no way to tell now. Only Russia and Syria know the true disposition of their forces and their capabilities versus whatever it is they see themselves facing on the battlefield. That information will avail itself publicly in time, but we have to wait for that time to pass. I'm not going to tell people one way or the other unless I actually have information that I can base it off of. Now, let's look at what the Western media is saying. This is the BBC. Syrian rebels take control of half of Aleppo, observers say. Now, I want to make it clear. These observers are based in the UK. This is a Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. And this was a propaganda outfit that the UK and the rest of the Western media referenced throughout the entirety of the US proxy war on Syria since it began in 2011. So keep that in mind. Rebel forces in Syria have taken control of half of the country's second largest city, Aleppo, according to the UK-based monitoring group, Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The offensive is the largest against the Syrian government in years, and the first time rebels fighting the forces of President Bashar al-Assad have reached Aleppo since they were forced out of by the army in 2016. So Aleppo had been under control of US-backed terrorists until the government regained control in 2016. So keep that in mind. Things had been much, much worse than what is taking place right now, as bad as it is, and it is bad. Aleppo's airport and all main roads leading into the city have been closed, military sources told Reuters news agency. The rebels were able to capture half of Aleppo without meeting significant resistance. That is important to understand. That means the military knew this was coming, and they decided rather than try to stop it outright, they would fight a fighting retreat, and they will reposition someplace where they can regroup and determine what to do and how to do it. Let's continue. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights Director Rami Abdelrahman told AFP News Agency earlier on Saturday there has been no fighting, not a single shot was fired as regime forces withdrew, he added. Earlier on Friday, government forces said they had regained positions in a number of towns in Aleppo and Idlib provinces, following the offensive launched by HTS and allied factions on Wednesday. Video posted on a channel affiliated with the Islamist group. When they say Islamist, and all of these different factions, whatever name they're assigning to them, they are the various flavors of Al-Qaeda created by the US and its Persian Gulf and Turkish allies.
Never forget that.
Region.
So never forget when you see this on the fake news and they're saying opposition fighters and rebels and they're cheering them on, they are openly cheering on Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the head choppers who enslaved Black people in Libya.
It appears to show rebel fighters in vehicles inside the city. So Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is simply a synonym for Al-Qaeda, as is Jabhat al-Nusra, and the many, many, many different rebrandings of these terrorist groups the Western media has gone through over many years. And they are doing the exact same thing in Syria that they are doing in Ukraine with Nazi military units inside the official Ukrainian armed forces, pretending that they aren't Nazis. These Nazi military units rebranding themselves, changing their literal Nazi logos to look a little more ambiguous, renaming them from, say, Azov to 3rd Assault Brigade, things like this, constantly rebranding, recreating their image as the public catches on to the fact that the U.S. is supporting literal Nazis in Ukraine and literal Al-Qaeda, ISIS terrorists in Syria and elsewhere. Now, the BBC article gives their version of the background story of this conflict. More than 500,000 people have been killed in the civil war. It was never a civil war. It was always a U.S. proxy war against Syria that erupted after the government cracked down on pro-democracy protests in 2011. No such pro-democracy protests took place. It was admittedly U.S. planned, prepared, equipped, funded mobs put out into the streets. In conjunction with militant groups, the U.S. also began preparing years ahead of time. I'm going to go over all of the evidence for that in just a moment. Again, taken from the Western media itself. An array of armed groups opposed to the Assad government, including jihadists. They're all Al-Qaeda, ISIS, all terrorists, literal terrorists, terrorists listed by the U.S. State Department as terrorists on their lists. Took advantage of the turmoil to seize swaths of territory. No, the U.S. deliberately created the turmoil to serve as a pretext for the armed overthrow of the Syrian government. The Syrian government, with the help from Russia and other allies, later retook most of the areas it had lost. Idlib, the last remaining opposition stronghold, is mostly controlled by HTS, but Turkish-backed rebel factions and Turkish forces are also based there. Now let's go back to the map. And you tell me where support for armed groups could possibly be coming from in this area, if not from NATO territory in Turkey. That is Turkey. And this is where they are. So unless these terrorist organizations are picking Kalashnikovs off date trees in Syria, their arms and ammunition are coming from Turkey via the US, CIA, special forces, gathered up from around the globe with money and contributions from other US allies, both in Europe and in the Persian Gulf, and of course in Turkey itself. That is how this proxy war was prepared years before it began in 2011, and that is how it has been carried out ever since. And so why not just get into all of the evidence of that? How far back did US preparations for the so-called Arab Spring in 2011, how early did that begin, and which components did the US prepare ahead of time? It's important to understand this, to understand what is happening in Syria right now. So the first article that I will go over is this from the New Yorker. In 2007, we're talking about the Bush administration. This article, The Redirection, by legendary journalist Seymour Hersh. The link to all of this will be in the video description below. I will read a little bit of it for you. In the past few months, again, this is back in 2007, as the situation in Iraq has deteriorated, the Bush administration, in both its public diplomacy and its covert operations, has significantly shifted its Middle East strategy. The redirection, as some insiders in the White House have called the new strategy, has brought the United States closer to an open confrontation with Iran, and in parts of the region propelled into a widening sectarian conflict between Shia and Sunni Muslims. Now, ordinarily, Sunni and Shia Muslims can coexist. They do in Syria. The Syrian Arab Army falls under a president who is a Shia Alawite sect Muslim, but most of the Syrian Arab Army are Sunni Muslims, and they have fought shoulder to shoulder against US-backed extremists for years and years now. Continuing, this is still Seymour Hersh's 2007 article. To undermine Iran, which is predominantly Shia, the Bush administration has decided, in effect, to reconfigure its priorities in the Middle East. In Lebanon, the administration has cooperated with Saudi Arabia's government, which is Sunni, in clandestine operations that are intended to weaken Hezbollah, the Shia organization that is backed by Iran. The U.S. has also taken part in clandestine operations aimed at Iran and its ally, Syria. A byproduct of these activities has been the bolstering of Sunni extremist groups that espouse a militant version of Islam and are hostile to America and sympathetic to Al-Qaeda. And in fact, the Muslim Brotherhood is the foundation upon which Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and all of these other extremist groups sprouted from. And it should be pointed out that Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. And at one point, Hamas was literally fighting alongside the US CIA armed and backed terrorists fighting in Syria. They were fighting side by side with them against the Syrian Arab Army, Iran, Hezbollah, and forces of the Russian Federation. Seymour Hersh cites a number of sources. One of these sources told him the Saudis have considerable financial means and have deep relations with the Muslim Brotherhood and Salafis. Again, because we remember that it was the US and its Persian Gulf allies arming and backing Al-Qaeda and ISIS for years and years and years. And it began with backing them actually in Syria, and then many of them being driven out, taking refuge in Afghanistan, where the US used them against the Soviet Union in the 1980s. The Saudis have considerable financial means and have deep relations with the Muslim Brotherhood and Salafis, who are Sunni extremists who view Shia as apostates. The last time Iran was a threat, the Saudis were able to mobilize the worst kind of Islamic radicals. Once you get them out of the box, you can't put them back. Another source, Seymour Hersh cited, it was explaining to him something that he had advised then US Vice President Dick Cheney. And it says, if the United States does try to move against Syria, members of the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood would be the ones to talk to. And that is exactly who the US, even at this time when Seymour Hersh was writing this article, the US was backing in Syria. And they had been backing them since the 1980s, as a matter of fact, to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad's father before him. So the same source was cited again. The Syrian Muslim Brotherhood, a branch of a radical Sunni movement founded in Egypt in 1928, engaged in more than a decade of violent opposition to the regime of Hafez Assad Bashar al-Assad's father. In 1982, the Brotherhood took control of the city of Hama. Assad bombarded the city for a week, killing between 6,000 and 20,000 people. Membership in the Brotherhood is punishable by death in Syria. The Brotherhood is also an avowed enemy of the US and of Israel. Nonetheless, the source said, "We told Cheney that the basic link between Iran and Lebanon is Syria, and to weaken Iran, you need to open the door to effective Syrian opposition." And I want to point this out. Yes, the Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, if you ask the rank and file who their enemy is, they would tell you, yes, Shia Muslims, of course, and anyone else who is not an extremist like them, of course, and they would single out the US and Israel in particular as enemies. But in reality, the Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and all of these other extremist organizations under this umbrella are extensions of US foreign policy and that of its proxies, including Israel. And the problem is many ordinary people who do not have the time, the energy, or even the desire to inform themselves, who blindly hate Israel, not as if there isn't a good reason to oppose Israeli policies or the Israeli government in general, they will see these organizations overtly opposed to Israel and they will support them, unaware of the fact that these organizations are actually serving US and thus Israeli objectives in the region, not actually opposing them. And they used this to great effect in the opening days and weeks of the Arab Spring, because all of these organizations were well known around the world as being anti-US and anti-Israeli. Superficially, many people reflexively supported them without looking into the background of who many of these specific groups or leaders were connected to or being funded by. If you did that, you would have seen that it was from top to bottom, left to right, it was a US created opposition movement, had nothing to do with opposing US or Israeli interests. It was advancing them, and it was all doing it under the guise of opposing it. And I will get into that in just a moment. But Seymour Hersh's 2007 piece continues. There is evidence that the administration's redirection strategy has already benefited the Brotherhood. So at this time, the US not only knew the Muslim Brotherhood was the proxy of choice to use in undermining Syria and thus Iran, they were already well underway in supporting them. The Syrian National Salvation Front is a coalition of opposition groups whose principal members are a faction led by Abdul Halim Kadam, a former Syrian vice president who defected in 2005, and the Brotherhood. A former high-ranking CIA officer told me, the Americans have provided both political and financial support. The Saudis are taking the lead with financial support, but there is American involvement. He said that Kadam, who now lives in Paris, was getting money from Saudi Arabia with the knowledge of the White House. In 2005, a delegation of the front's members met with officials from the National Security Council, according to press reports. A former White House official told me that the Saudis had provided members of the front with travel documents. So they were creating a what would become a government in exile. And if you were familiar with the 2011 Arab Spring, that was the pattern. The US would start with these protests. They would move in the militant groups that they had been preparing and arming for years. They already had these governments in exile on standby in Europe, in Washington, in Virginia, ready to declare themselves the legitimate government of these targeted countries. And the US would then shift their recognition from the internationally recognized governments of these countries to these hand-picked client regimes that they had created ahead of time and had on standby. That was the pattern. Then if they were successful in overthrowing the targeted nation, they would install them into power, as they did in Libya, for example. Also, as they did in Egypt. As a matter of fact, the Muslim Brotherhood was also involved in the protests in Egypt in 2011, the Arab Spring protests in Egypt. There were US-backed National Endowment for Democracy funded political groups that created chaos in the streets. The Muslim Brotherhood came in to exploit it and escalate it with significant and armed violence. They eventually succeeded in overthrowing the Egyptian government. And it was the Muslim Brotherhood's Mohammed Morsi who actually ended up as president of Egypt until he was overthrown by the Egyptian military. Before he was overthrown by the Egyptian military, one of the very first things he did was cut all ties with the Syrian government, no longer recognizing the Syrian government as the legitimate government of Syria, and openly began supporting the US-backed terrorists trying to overthrow the Syrian government. When the Egyptian military overthrew the government of Mohammed Morsi and threw him in jail, one of the first things they did was reestablish ties to Syria and begin shifting support back to the government away from these armed terrorists, who were also the same terrorists and organizations the US used to overthrow the Egyptian government. So as you could see, it was a regional effort using the same networks that the US stood up in each and every one of these countries. And again, many people supported Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt because of their overt, superficial hatred of Israel, when in reality they were an extension of US foreign policy objectives. They were not opposing them, and if you're not opposing US foreign policy objectives, there's no way you're opposing America's Israeli proxies and their objectives. So that was Seymour Hersh all the way back in 2007, warning the world that the United States government at that time was working with the Muslim Brotherhood and other extremists to undermine and possibly even overthrow at least the Syrian government, but also Lebanon and possibly eventually Iran. Fast forward to 2011, the Arab Spring has sprung. These protesters are in the streets, these militants that the US was admittedly backing as far back as 2000, at least as far back as 2007. They are now taking advantage of this and attempting to violently overthrow all of these targeted governments, including the Syrian government. Because a lot of these groups were superficially anti-Israeli, people reflexively supported them, and they ignored all of the very obvious evidence that they were in fact backed by the US. They were not opposing the US. And eventually articles like this came out. This was by the New York Times. This was in April 2011. US groups helped nurture Arab uprising. This was not something that happened and the US took advantage of. This was something they created from whole cloth years in advance. A number of the groups and individuals directly involved in the revolts and reforms sweeping the region received training and financing from groups like the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, and Freedom House, nonprofit human rights organization based in Washington, according to interviews in recent weeks and American diplomatic cables obtained by WikiLeaks. We have WikiLeaks to thank for a lot of this. Julian Assange's organization. The Republican and Democratic institutes that they just listed are affiliated with the Republican and Democratic parties in the United States, obviously. They are created by Congress and are financed through the National Endowment for Democracy, which was set up in the 1980s to channel grants for promoting democracy in developing nations. The National Endowment for Democracy, in turn, receives about $100 million annually from Congress. Freedom House also gets the bulk of its money from the American government, mainly the State Department. So it is the US government funding political interference around the world and claiming that it is promoting democracy. It also admits in this New York Times article that some Egyptian youth leaders and many other opposition groups the US was backing, creating and backing, attended a 2008 technology meeting in New York, where they were taught how to use social networking and mobile technologies to promote democracy, in other words, to overthrow their respective countries. Among those sponsoring the meeting were Facebook, Google, MTV, Columbia Law School, and the State Department. And it wasn't just in 2008. They had these meetings every single year for a number of years. They still have these meetings just under different groups. Right now, it's primarily the Oslo Freedom Forum. All of it is ultimately funded, organized, directed by the US State Department, either directly and openly or through intermediaries. I have provided evidence of this for years now. So the Arab Spring didn't start in 2011. It began years in advance. The US created the political organizations that would lead the protests on the street. They also created the militant organizations that would use the protests as cover to violently overthrow these different targeted governments, including Egypt, including Syria, also Libya, remember at the time. And Libya represented the full cycle. Political protests, militants trying to overthrow the country, US military intervention, and then the full overthrow and replacement of the government by a client regime. That was what was supposed to happen in each and every country. If it was possible, say, in Egypt to overthrow the government without military intervention, then so be it. In Syria, we can see that even with US military intervention, regime change failed. So it was a regional effort, and there was a mix of success and failure in each country that was targeted. So the BBC article this week talking about the terrorist offensive aimed at Aleppo and elsewhere across northern Syria, they're claiming this all started with pro-democracy protests the Syrian government was repressing. I just showed you evidence from the same Western media that the US prepared this years in advance. This had nothing to do with democracy. This was overthrowing governments the US didn't want in power so that they could tighten their grip of control over the entire Middle East. What does this have to do with Ukraine? How does this tie into Ukraine? Remember this 2019 Rand Corporation paper, Extending Russia, Competing from Advantageous Ground. Look at the table of contents. Under geopolitical measures, one was provide lethal aid to Ukraine. That happened during the Trump administration. That began and continued under the Trump administration and then the Biden administration. Measure number two, increase support to the Syrian rebels. Increase support, which means they were already supporting the rebels. How do we know that? Because the Western media admitted it. This was 2012. New York Times, CIA said to aid in steering arms to Syrian opposition. They were bringing it in by the plane load into Turkey and then moving it to the terrorist groups along the border and then into Syria. If you look at the map, the conflict map over time in Syria, you can see that these supposed pro-democracy rebels actually look like they simply invaded Syria from the border regions. They didn't uprise across the country. They came in over the borders, armed, trained, backed by the US and its regional partners. So this New York Times article says, a small number of CIA officers are operating secretly in southern Turkey, helping allies decide which Syrian opposition fighters across the border will receive arms to fight the Syrian government, according to American officials and Arab intelligence officers. The weapons include automatic rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, ammunition, and some anti-tank weapons are being funneled mostly across the Turkish border by way of shadowy network of intermediaries, including Syria's Muslim Brotherhood and paid for by Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, the officials said. So Seymour Hersh back in 2007 warned that this was happening. The New York Times is admitting by 2012, not only that it is happening, but they're explaining to you in part how it is happening. The CIA officers had been in southern Turkey for several weeks, in part to help keep weapons out of the hands of fighters allied with al-Qaeda or other terrorist groups, one senior American official said. Of course, they have to say that. They can't admit that there are no moderate rebels. They are all terrorists. And the US not only is arming them, but doing it deliberately. And that was always part of the plan. Remember Seymour Hersh in 2007 talking about the Muslim Brotherhood and the fact that it was an extremist organization, that organizations like al-Qaeda are simply sprung out of the Muslim Brotherhood. But maybe you don't find that convincing enough. So I'm going to show you a US Defense Intelligence Agency document from 2012. This is it here. Again, the link will be in the video description below. This was published on judicialwatch.org. And we're going to read through several parts. First part here, the general situation. The Salafist, the Muslim Brotherhood, and al-Qaeda are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. The West, Gulf countries, and Turkey support the opposition. Who do they support? Salafist, Muslim Brotherhood, and al-Qaeda. They're saying it in black and white here in this US Defense Intelligence Agency document, while Russia, China, and Iran support the regime. In other words, Russia, China, Iran support Syria against internationally recognized terrorists. The U.S. and its allies are backing in a proxy war against Syria. That is what this document is saying. It also says down here, if the situation unravels, there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria. And this is exactly what the supporting powers, who are the supporting powers? The US and its regional allies, as they said earlier in this document. And that is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want. So the US wanted a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in order to isolate the Syrian regime, which is considered the strategic depth of the Shia expansion, Iraq and Iran. Salafist principality. Salafist, Islamic, principality, state. Salafist principality, Islamic state. The US deliberately created the Islamic State to do what? To isolate the Syrian regime. It is in black and white. That was the plan, and they admitted it in this leaked document. It is irrefutable.
Created ISIS.
And that is what continues to this day. The U.S. is using literal terrorists in the Middle East.
Never forget, Trump said Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton created ISIS. That's what he was saying. He know what he's talking about. Then he'll say, oh, I meant by Barack pulling out. No, you know what you were saying, Trump. They created ISIS to destroy the Syrian government. That's a fact. And that same group, like I said, they used to kill Gaddafi. That's a fact. And that same group been rampaging through Africa ever since. That's a fact.
To overthrow governments it doesn't like, governments that it claims are the bad guys, while the U.S. itself is backing, arming, facilitating the actual worst people in the region, possibly on the planet, besides themselves, of course. So getting all the way back to this recent BBC article, they talk about Russia's response. Russia's military said it had bombed extremist forces, has it in quotation marks. So all of the evidence that I just showed you, you can see how the BBC is still playing this propaganda game where it's pretending that these are pro-democracy rebels, not the worst sort of terrorists in the region that the U.S. and its allies are backing. So it says Russia's military said it had bombed extremist forces, according to Russian news agencies, and there's a lot of footage of that taking place. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov expressed his support for the government of Syria to quickly restore order and said the country's sovereignty was under attack. Of course, obviously it is. These are terrorists backed by the United States with the help of Turkey. Again, remember the map of the conflict unfolding over several years. You can see the terrorists flowing into the country over the border. It couldn't be more obvious. Now, unless something has changed significantly since this conflict was essentially frozen around 2019, 2020, 2021, Russia and Syria still hold a major advantage over these militants. They have all sorts of weapons. They have large amounts of ground forces. They do not have air power. They do not have sophisticated air defenses. They have man-portable air defense systems with a limited range. They can target and take out low-flying warplanes or helicopters, but they are unable to reach warplanes flying at high altitudes, which are capable of dropping precision-guided weapons. This is how Russia assisted Syria in taking back their entire country. You saw how dire it was before the intervention, and you saw how much territory Syria then managed to take back. That was because these rat lines flowing from NATO into Syria were cut, and the fighters were isolated, and they were not able to sufficiently sustain their combat capacity on the battlefield. They were then moved on by the Syrian Arab Army and its allies on the ground, and they systematically wiped them out of the country, pushed them back into Idlib, where they have stayed until now. Russia's use of air power right now, it does not seem as if it's being contested. That would be a significant escalation. It would require U.S. or Turkish intervention to target Russian warplanes flying at high altitude. it appears that they are able to hit the supply lines of these advancing terrorists, and that is going to inhibit their combat power. There is extensive footage of these terrorists being targeted by both Russian and Syrian military aviation. There is also footage of these terrorists surprising and overwhelming Syrian and Russian troops in small numbers. But I would warn people against trying to draw conclusions from open source evidence at this early stage. We simply do not know what is actually happening. We should not draw conclusions based on tactical vignettes available online. Now, the collective West is clearly overstretched. They are incapable of defeating Russia in any one of these targeted areas. They cannot outfight Russia in its proxy war against them in Ukraine. They have fundamentally failed until now to fight and overwhelm Russia and its allies in Syria. Even in Georgia, the US is having a hard time trying to reassert control over the government there. They are incapable of doing this for a number of reasons. First and foremost, as I have said over and over again, their military industrial capacity, their actual military power, the ability to fight Russia directly or even indirectly is greatly diminished. And even the sense of deterrence that the US could project with military power it has, but is not using, even that is not producing the results that they desire vis-a-vis Russia in all of these areas. So what they're doing is using other means that they have invested in, including these armies of terrorists that they have been keeping around in northern Syria. And so it really is a matter of whether or not Russia can weather the summation of all of this pressure. What will Turkey do? And the whole reason Idlib was never retaken by Syrian forces backed by Russia and Iran was because Turkish forces moved into the area and created a buffer zone first. If Turkish forces move behind these advancing terrorists and claim this territory, Russia and Syria are going to have to make a decision. Do they go to war with Turkey directly to take this territory back, or do they just forfeit this territory? And if Turkey were to do this, this would cripple their credibility internationally. It was already questionable whether or not to deal in good faith with Turkey because of their status as a NATO member and their track record in the past. This would probably be the final deciding factor as to whether the multipolar world could trust and work with Turkey. Now, finally, again, we can kind of see very easily how this is all connected. All of this is an attempt by the US to encircle and contain Russia, Iran, China. If you look at a map, you can see how Russia, China, Iran, these are the core pillars of not only Eurasia, but the pillars holding up multipolarism. If you were to take out Russia, Iran, and China, there would be no multipolarism. It would revert back to US-led primacy over the entire globe. Russia is advancing. It's committed militarily to Ukraine, and it is advancing rapidly in Ukraine. So the US has created a military dilemma for Russia in Syria, and it will have to make a decision about how to allocate resources. Does it have enough resources to invest in the defense of both its ongoing special military operation in Ukraine and its defense of Syria? But one thing I do think this tells us, the reigniting of armed conflict in northern Syria, despite all kinds of deals being made between Russia, Syria, and Turkey, is that any freeze in a conflict is going to be used by the US and its proxies as a means of rearming, reorganizing, and restarting the fight when the terms are more favorable for them. So this is exactly what they have just done in Syria. They spent years regrouping, rearming, and preparing for this offensive. This particular offensive was likely specifically planned for months ahead of time before it was just launched this past week. That is exactly what they're going to do in Ukraine. And as a matter of fact, we see them doing that in Ukraine. First of all, just to drive home this point, this is from Reuters, this November 26, 2024. So over the past week, Russia advances in Ukraine at fastest monthly pace since start of the war, analysts say. And what they're admitting is that despite authorizing the use of NATO missiles inside Russia, Russian forces are accelerating faster now than ever. In every respect, Ukrainian combat power is collapsing. And then we have discussions like this. And all of this points to the creation of a buffer zone in Ukraine, just as one was created in Syria. So this is Le Monde, French newspaper, discussions over sending European troops to Ukraine reignited. And this is the UK and France, but of course, the UK and France would not even be discussing this if it wasn't the US planning this ultimately. And it says, as the conflict in Ukraine enters a new phase of escalation, discussions over sending Western troops and private defense companies to Ukraine have been revived, Le Monde has learned from corroborating sources. These are sensitive discussions, most of which are classified, relaunched in light of potential American withdrawal support for Kiev once Donald Trump takes office on January 20th, 2025. I do not believe that America is going to be withdrawing support from Ukraine. I believe the support they have available for Ukraine simply doesn't exist, and now they're trying to re-explore what options they have in either continuing this or freezing it. Discussions are underway between the UK and France on defense cooperation, particularly in a view of creating a hard core of allies, a coalition of the willing, if you will, in Europe, focused on Ukraine and wider European security, confided a British military source to Le Monde. And then we have this very recent article from Sky News. Zelensky suggests hot phase of Ukraine war could end in return for NATO membership if offered, even if seized land isn't returned immediately. So this is Ukraine slowly accepting the reality that it's not getting its territory back and exploring the possibility of some sort of conflict freeze. That is the way this all looks. Vladimir Zelensky has suggested a ceasefire deal could be struck if Ukrainian territory he controls could be taken under the NATO umbrella, allowing him to negotiate the return of the rest later in a diplomatic way. That's in quotation marks. And of course, no, not in a diplomatic way. After they have time to rearm, re-equip, reorganize, they will launch another armed campaign against Russia, just as US-backed terrorists are doing in Syria right now as I'm talking. Mr. Zelensky said NATO membership would have to be offered to unoccupied parts of the country in order to end the hot phase of the war, as long as the NATO invitation itself recognizes Ukraine's internationally recognized borders. He appeared to accept occupied eastern parts of the country would fall outside of such a deal for the time being, which means Russia has absolutely no reason to agree to this in any shape, form, or way, because all it's going to do is allow Ukraine to escape Russia's growing momentum right now, rearm, regroup, and become a greater threat to Russia than it already was before Russia decided it needed to launch a special military operation. And we can see this whole process, a glimpse of how this will work out in the near, I would say relatively near future. We can see how it's playing out in Syria. All of these agreements meant to freeze and eventually end the conflict were used by the collective West to simply rearm, reorganize, relaunch their proxy war against Syria and ultimately Iran and Russia. This Sky News article, even though Ukrainian leader Zelensky is talking about NATO membership, this could still happen even without NATO membership. The collective West would just send a coalition of forces into Ukraine to ensure at least part of what is left of Ukraine would be under Western occupation, just as parts of Syria are under Turkish and American occupation. And it would leave Russia a choice whether to stop where it is or to open up an actual conflict with Western forces in Ukraine, just as Russia and Syria would have to do vis-a-vis the US or Turkey in Syria. The US has essentially declared war on the status quo. It understands that within the global status quo, the world is gradually pivoting away from US-led hegemony to multipolarism. So they have declared war on the status quo, and they are attempting to destroy it in every manner possible, including war, proxy war, outright war. The rest of the world is going to have to make difficult decisions regarding US aggression around the globe. It's war on the status quo. And what the rest of the world is willing to do to stop this, to preserve the status quo, or to create a new status quo. As the US becomes more and more reckless, I believe more and more difficult decisions need to be made to confront and contain US actions. At the end of the day, we have to just wait and see. We do not know where the limits of where the true limits of American, Russian, Iranian, and Chinese power actually are. That information will avail itself as events unfold, but we need to keep a close eye on them and do careful analysis in the meantime. And I will continue to keep an eye on all of this. Until then, if you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. All of my
We're having tremendous developments that are rapidly changing very, very quickly in Syria. We have the Syrian armed opposition now reaching areas next to Hama. Now look, yesterday the report started happening that the armed opposition in Syria, they reached the outskirts of Aleppo. Reports that were initially denied by Syria. However, then we started to have confirmations that they are not only on the outskirts of Aleppo, that they are actually controlling Aleppo. Now we have all of the Syrian opposition forces controlling. How solid is the control? How long will they control it? That's a different debate. But literally going in and taking these areas up to Hama. Hama is very, very close to Homs, which is a very key location. Hama is a very strategic place, and there have been reports that the Syrian armed forces started to retreat. They started to retreat from Hama. And how else can you explain the rapid move coming from the Syrian opposition? Okay. To clarify further, look at this map here. This is the map of Syria. Yesterday we were talking about the M5 road. The M5 road, which is an extremely strategic road stretching from Aleppo down to Hama, Homs, Damascus, reaching near Dar'a and the Suwaida alongside the Jordanian borders. And if we look at this road, Yesterday, the opposition forces, they were around about this area. Now we're talking about Hama. Where is Hama? Hama is only a few miles away from the northern Lebanese borders, next to Homs. How did the opposition move so rapidly from these areas down to Hama? And Hama, that's an ongoing thing now. We're having more and more reports coming from people on the ground about the control or lack thereof of the Syrian armed opposition in Hama, with reports about the Syrian army retreating. Well, clearly how we have the Syrian army retreating. I mean, the opposition posted some videos as well of them imprisoning some of the people working for the government with the Assad government in some of these locations in Aleppo and in other areas too. Okay, the only thing that will explain it is a retreat, and a retreat has been evident. Why is the Syrian army retreating? The Syrian army is retreating for various reasons. They could be retreating to primarily protect Homs, which is considered to be the main key location before Damascus. That's the next step. We have had reports or confirmation statements coming from the Syrian opposition that now we're talking about liberating Syria. They're not just talking about a limited operation. Turkey spoke about a limited operation, not the Syrian opposition. The Syrian opposition said, we began here in Halab, but we are looking to liberate all of Syria. Now, the Syrian army, funny enough, what they've done here is started to use the help of the Kurdish movements that are controlling some parts of the northeastern parts of Syria and are backed by the United States as well, against the mostly Turkish-backed and also United States-backed Syrian opposition controlling Aleppo. And there were certain confirmations that the Syrian democratic forces in yellow, right, are controlling some of the parts of Aleppo. Why? Because they are coordinating, and you need to be patient here because it can be sometimes overwhelming for those of you who haven't, monitored the Syrian situation for a while. Syria, you have the government control areas, the Syrian opposition controlled areas, other movements within the Syrian opposition controlled areas, the Kurdish movements controlled areas. Now, why did the Kurdish movements join forces with the government with this? Although the government is against all of the talks about, having a different section of the Syrian territories going towards Kurdistan, for example. It's because they have a problem with Erdogan. It's because they have a problem with Turkey, and they know that these forces are backed by Turkey. So therefore, they are willing to participate with the Syrian government in this offensive in Aleppo. How successful that was, again, we're talking about a live, updated situation. The Syrian opposition indeed published footage of them controlling key hubs of the entirety of Aleppo. So the Kurdish forces that are supporting or, tactically siding with the Syrian government, not strategically, in this area, are probably having certain disruptions towards the advancement of the Turkish-backed opposition coming from the northeastern side of Syria. All of that indicates that it took the Syrian army by surprise. It took the Syrian army by surprise. That's the first argument. So they did not want to go out in an all-out confrontation that they weren't necessarily prepared for. The second assumption is the fact that, well, the Syrian armed forces wanted to primarily focus and put in their heavy forces in the Homs area, because they probably had a red line. To them, they were like, okay, we are facing a surprise offensive. They have prepared for it for a long time. The timing, quite suspicious. However, they decided to implement it now, same day or the day after we had ceasefire in Lebanon, shortly after the ceasefire in Lebanon, 15 hours after Netanyahu was warning Syria as well. And we have red lines. What are the red lines? The red lines could be Homs. The red line could be Homs, because Homs, it would lock all of this area from Aleppo to Homs, coming very close to the Lebanese borders, and also locking this area that is also controlled by the Syrian government. Latakia, Tartus, these areas. So the Syrian government locations will be locked in this area, and the opposition would be controlling the very strategic M5, again, making it easier to continue their advancement towards Damascus and potentially more down south. Another thing that we could be looking at is, well, the timing of this attack came when? It came after we had a ceasefire in Lebanon. So Hezbollah were not assisting the Syrian government in certain areas, and they were fighting against the Israeli occupation in this war. And they have more of their forces in Lebanon. And Iran was busy with all of these escalations that are happening. Also, we were talking about a de-escalation process for the past 4 years between Syria and large parts of the Syrian opposition, because not all the Syrian opposition is united under one umbrella. That's been a key thing since the beginning of what was labeled at the time the Syrian revolution, that turned into what was followingly labeled as the civil war in Syria, or the conflict in Syria. And they are waiting for more reinforcements. Where could they get their reinforcements from? A couple of locations. The first reinforcement that we had reports about is Iraq. Iraqi movements declared that they are sending or prepared to send tens of thousands of armed fighters to help the Syrian government stop this advancement down south. We heard reports, but they did not come officially from the movement of Ansarullah, that Yemen might also be helping. Now, mind you, that hasn't been confirmed by Ansarullah. And also, that is less likely. Why? Because firstly, in Iraq, you have excess. You have many people willing to fight, and they would make up the numbers that would be demanded by the Syrian government to stop the advancement of the ongoing forces of the Syrian opposition. Now, these are the primary things that we're talking about here. Why now, and why the M5? I spoke about it in more detail yesterday. I will briefly speak about this now. The M5 is one of the key roads in Syria that is connecting the northern part to the southern part towards the western coast of Syria. And this has been an area under Syrian government control for the past 4 years. The Syrian opposition, as you can see in this map, they have been positioned in these areas before. Now this is the new map of their advancement here, but before that, they were primarily in these areas towards the Idlib province, alongside the northern parts that are at the border with Turkey, and towards the northeastern side, because this is the northwestern side, towards the northeastern side, we had the Kurdish movements, but the rest of it was Syria. What's happening is not something light. This is not something that anyone can take lightly, by the way. It's a very dangerous escalation in Syria. And there are assumptions that we are indeed talking about a very large operation coming from these movements. Okay, what's being done to try and solve this problem now? What's being done to try immediate? Because, like I said, just a few weeks back, in recent months, we've had talks with Turkey, potentially meeting with the government in Syria, having a reconciliation process with parts of the opposition as well. Most of the parties involved in the Sochi and Astana summits confirming that they all want to have a united Syrian state and not divided. In return, would they have certain reforms being done by the government? Because the main movement started due to government corruption and to do with freedoms and things like that in the beginning, but then it quickly escalated to something more serious, more violent, and you had countries immediately being involved with a vast history of supporting war crimes globally. What's being done? The thing that is being done primarily is coming from Iran. Russia, they had tense talks with Turkey, telling to the Turkish government, you're breaching the agreements. They told the Turkish government, you are breaching the agreements that we had in Astana and Sochi. What are you doing? Right? To that, Turkey responded, we are not involved in the fighting. The Turkish foreign minister, Hakan Fidan, he said, we're not involved in the fighting, and we know that this is a limited operation. Again, that's not the full picture. Why? Because, well, all of the weapons are from Turkey, training is from Turkey, the arms from Turkey, vehicles from Turkey, and not only Turkey, you're talking about other countries too. And Turkey is a member of the NATO. We had Ukrainian support for some of the opposition forces that are fighting now and expanding, and of course US support, and some of them, and we're trying to be as objective as possible and not conclusive and labeling everyone, some of the opposition movements that were advancing were talking with Israeli media. They were talking with the Israeli broadcasting Khan 11, speaking with them, saying that, we don't want to, necessarily worry the Israelis. Our problem here is Iran, Russia, and the regime of Bashar al-Assad. This is what they're saying to Israeli media. And of course, they have history, some of them, with Israel treating some of them in their hospitals, so supporting them with intel, at least intel. And let's not forget that these operations that are ongoing and could be seen or sold to the public in mass, whether the Arab or Muslim public or the Western public, as natural moves that are just happening like that, would later, in a few decades' time, be revealed as operations, covert operations by the CIA, right? Like what? Well, Operation Cyclone. Operation Cyclone, the program that was financing and arming the Mujahideen in Afghanistan by the CIA from 1979 to 1989, before and after the military intervention of the Soviets in Afghanistan. And who was involved? Well, Israel, the United States, Pakistan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, alongside other countries too. How much did the CIA spend? Reports over $2 billion in Operation Cyclone in Afghanistan. Zbigniew Brzezinski at the time, he visited the Mujahideen. He was the national security advisor at the time. He visited them, the fighters in Afghanistan, and he told them, you are fighters, God is with you. God is with you. You are genuine fighters, and go and take your homes, and we're supporting you. Zbigniew Brzezinski. And not only Zbigniew Brzezinski, Margaret Thatcher. Apartheid supporting Margaret Thatcher. And one of my followers kindly shared a video with me, actually, that I want to share with you, of Margaret Thatcher herself, right? In 1981, visiting the Mujahideen. Let me show you.
Inside the bright tented enclosure, 1,500 men waited. We were told that many of these men were mujahideen who traveled from the border specially for this meeting. A mullah chanted some verses from the Quran concerning exiles. Mrs. Thatcher promised them an extra £2 million worth of aid, and she made clear the West's support for the Afghan resistance fighters.
I want to say that the hearts of the free world are with you, and with those of your countrymen who have stayed.
And that gained her ringing shouts of support.
Margaret Thatcher, apartheid supporting Margaret Thatcher, going to visit the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, telling them that we are with you. We are with you. With the resistance fighters, right? All of a sudden, when it's suitable for the empire, they become resistance fighters. Woohoo! And I know I shared this video with you as well, and I will share it again with you. This is the video of Zbigniew Brzezinski in Afghanistan as well. That's during Operation Cyclone, by the way, that I was speaking about. That was, well, like all of the other operations of the CIA, they are the front of the United States empire. Operation Ajax in Iran before, in Cuba, and of course, Cyclone, alongside other operations too. This is the video of Brzezinski.
U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of God to redouble their efforts.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
There you have it. Okay. At the time, the people who were fighting, the Soviets, of course, they weren't viewing anything apart from what they're doing. And that's why I mentioned this example when it comes to Afghanistan. That operation wasn't very visible to what's happening on the ground when it comes to the people who were actually fighting. All of a sudden, countries under the US umbrella allowing people to go and fight. All of a sudden, all of the roads are open to Afghanistan. All of the roads are open to other Arab countries, other Muslim countries. All the roads are open. Are the roads open to, were the roads open to Israel at any point? Were they ever open to Israel, a country occupying Palestine for all of that time? And that's why it's important to understand the people backing these moves to establish what is actually happening on the ground. And again, what's happening in Syria now can be revealed in the next couple of decades as a failed operation, or if something changed, they might say a successful operation. That was supported and backed by the CIA, you know, in future WikiLeaks. The timing is exceptionally suspicious. The roads that they are trying to control in Syria are exceptionally strategic roads, and you have movements that are outright declaring that they are fighting against movements fighting against Israel. The active resistance front, the resistance front actively fighting against Israel in the form of countries or movements in countries, Iran, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Who does that support? And who will end up benefiting from it? And do these people fighting now against the Syrian government, do they have a track record of firing a bullet at Israel? They don't have a track record of firing one bullet at Israel. Sorry, there was once at one point, they accidentally fired a bullet at Israel, and then they apologized for it. So we're not talking about a track record here, and the timing is very suspicious. And also, this came after the United States and Israel failed with their attempts to convince Russia to pass or stop passing arms or allowing Syria to pass arms to Lebanon through Syria, to which the Russians responded, that's not part of our duties. When it comes to the apology, this is one of the apologies here. Ex-defense minister Ya'alon, who's actually confirming that there's a genocide now in Gaza, actually, funny enough, he said that the Islamic State apologized to Israel for a November clash. You know, they accidentally opened fire and they apologized. And we haven't seen anything since. Well, we have seen Israel treating the wounded coming from them, right? That's what we had. And again, suspicious but serious. Well, what's happening is exceptionally serious. And when it comes to also, of course, the treating of the wounded, Israel treating Al-Qaeda fighters wounded in Syria civil war. That's from the Jerusalem Post. Amnesty report, ISIS armed with US weapons. That's also confirmed, even in Israel and in Western mainstream media. Now, of course, this situation is developing, and we will continue monitoring the situation and what's happening with it to shed some light as to what's going on in Syria. What I wanted to talk to you finally is what attempts are being taken. What attempts are being taken now to stop what's happening. The effort is coming from Russia's talking to Turkey primarily, but the main thing that could be successful, that could have some success, is this: the Iranian foreign minister Abbas Araghchi going to Syria and then going to Turkey. He's outright going literally directly to Syria, and then he's going to go to Turkey to try and see if we can get this resolved. We had the peace process going on. We were looking at de-escalation. We just came out of a war with a genocide entity, and you didn't help us with a thing. As a matter of fact, you were only spewing venom and propaganda and undermining anything that we do so far. And now you're launching this attack on us when we had a peace process going on, right? Connect the dots. So we had this report in IRNA. Ismail Baqai told reporters on Sunday evening that the top diplomat will depart for Syria on Sunday. That's tomorrow. The spokesperson said that Araghchi will also visit Turkey on the second leg of his tour, which will be followed by a third destination without naming it. It could be Russia. According to Baqai, the Iranian foreign minister will hold the negotiations on regional issues, including the latest developments in West Asia. Now, we've had back and forth talks with Iran and Turkey. They have been at odds in Syria, like they have been at odds in other locations too. As a matter of fact, Erdogan, when Iran launched this historic attack on Israel in April, he undermined it. Shows you the level of underlying tensions. Although they have massive coordination in terms of economy and other stuff too, but they do have tensions, Iran and Turkey. And Turkey tries to undermine the Iranian role when it comes to supporting the resistance fronts in the region. Something that has been proven to anyone with a pair of eyes. That has been proven completely in the past year, just over a year. Which countries were participating in resisting the biggest war criminals in the region? Iran, Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, with involvement from Syria. These were the people of. Did someone else participate? Did any other country-backed movement participate? Were any of these tanks moving to Aleppo and Hama now and on their way potentially down south? Were they activated? I don't know, towards the Golan Heights or something? Or not? No, they haven't. They haven't been. But this diplomatic effort could potentially be fruitful. Tomorrow we will see what would be the results of the first day when it comes to Syria. Now, mind you, Iran sees this as a big threat. Iran sees this as a big threat. And it's important to note that in previous years, many parts of Syria were under the control of the armed opposition in Syria. But how long did they last? Not very long. Not very long. And although this is a significant thing happening, that is almost resembling the massive wave of ISIS in Iraq and Syria in just over a decade ago. It has things that resemble the level and the fact that other sides are also confirming that it's happening. But again, these efforts could be fruitful. Tomorrow we'll see what happens in Syria. The day after, maybe, that's if it's the day after, unless he stays the foreign minister of Iran in Syria for more than that. And then we will hopefully also cover the
The situation of the Ukrainian army continues to deteriorate rapidly in all directions of the Special Military Operations Zone. So, a few minutes ago, war correspondents reported that on November 30th, at 10 a.m. Moscow time, Russian troops entered the strategically important settlement of Zeltoy, located 10 kilometers south of the main city of Donbass, Pokrovsk. According to war correspondents, the battle for this settlement lasted only a few hours. It is reported that by the evening of November 30th, Russian army units had completely liberated this urban-type settlement, forcing Ukrainian soldiers to flee to the neighboring village of Novopustinka. Thus, the Russian army continues to bypass the city of Pokrovsk from the south, while expanding the bridgehead and increasing pressure on the Ukrainian army's positions in this direction of the front, which poses a threat to the Ukrainian troops located not only in Pokrovsk, but also in neighboring Myrnograd. Against this backdrop, German Major General Christian Freuding made a rather alarming statement for the Ukrainian General Staff. In particular, he stated that Pokrovsk's fate is sealed. This high-ranking German army officer expressed confidence that Ukrainian troops would leave the city of Pokrovsk by the end of December this year. At the same time, the German general noted that the loss of Pokrovsk would cause significant damage to the entire Ukrainian army, since this city is an important transport hub, where many railways and highways intersect. Surprisingly, despite the powerful information propaganda in the West, this German general decided not to hide the truth, and also recognized the fact that the Ukrainian army is retreating not only in Pokrovsk, but also in other directions of the front, including the Kursk region. Over the past 24 hours, the situation of the Ukrainian army has also rapidly deteriorated in the Kharkiv direction of the front. In particular, Ukrainian and Russian war correspondents stated that Russian troops had fully seized the initiative in this direction of the front. It is reported that on November 30th, at 3 p.m. Moscow time, Russian troops took control of 70% of the territory of the settlement of Zagrezovo, located on the left bank of the Oskol Reservoir, in the southeastern part of the Kharkiv region. My dear truth seekers, Zagrezovo is a strategically important settlement, because an important highway and railway pass through this village, leading into the southern part of the city of Kupiansk. The loss of this settlement by the Ukrainian army will lead to the fact that the Ukrainian High Military Command will lose important logistics chains. Moreover, the liberation of Zagrezovo will allow the Russian army to create a bridgehead for a future offensive against the settlement of Borovaya, which is an important supply hub for the Ukrainian army units throughout the Kupiansk direction of the front. In Chasiv Yar direction of the front, war correspondents began to record the preparation of the Ukrainian army units for an organized retreat from the city of Chasiv Yar. Moreover, war correspondents also reported that Russian paratroopers managed to completely surround the refractory plant in the northern part of the city. According to them, 700 Ukrainian soldiers are trapped in this factory, among whom there are also foreign mercenaries. It is reported that these are mainly Italian, Georgian, and Colombian citizens. According to war correspondents, Russian troops are in no hurry to storm this refractory plant. Instead, the encircled factory is being shelled by Russian artillery and combat aviation in non-stop mode. It is reliably known that Russian paratroopers told Ukrainian soldiers and foreign mercenaries to lay down their arms and surrender, otherwise they would all be destroyed by Fab 3000 guided aerial bombs. In Korokovo direction of the front, Russian troops took control of the central part of the city of Korokovo. It is reported that as of December 1, 2024, Ukrainian soldiers and officers continue to voluntarily desert the western part of the city. At the same time, many Russian telegram channels report that retreating Ukrainian army units are blowing up buildings in the city, where wounded Ukrainian soldiers are located. According to war correspondent Alexander Sladkov, the situation of the Ukrainian army in Korokovo is catastrophic. I am shocked by the actions of the Ukrainian command. The Ukrainian generals once again abandoned their soldiers to the lacerations of the Russian army. Every day, hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers continue to die for a city that has long been lost by the Ukrainian army, Alexander Sladkov said. Ukrainian telegram channels also confirmed the words of the Russian war correspondent. According to them, Korokovo is almost completely lost by the Ukrainian army. At the same time, Ukrainian sources noted that the reserves sent by the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine to Kurakovo have not had an impact on the situation on the ground. Against this backdrop, it is reported that Kurakovo may come under full control of the Russian army in the coming days. In the Kursk direction of the front, Ukrainian army units also continue to retreat. In particular, the Ukrainian General Staff finally recognized the loss of such settlements as Deryino and Nizhny Klin by the Ukrainian army. Moreover, the Ukrainian side was also forced to recognize the successes of the Russian army in the southeastern part of the Sudzansky district of the Kursk region. According to Ukrainian telegram channels, Russian troops managed to make significant progress in the Plakovo area and completely dislodge Ukrainian army units from the eastern part of this settlement. Meanwhile, the commander of Spetsnaz Akhmat, General Avdiy Alatonov, officially announced that a group of soldiers in NATO military uniforms had been discovered and destroyed in the Kursk region. According to him, these NATO soldiers were destroyed in one of the forest plantations, northeast of the city of Sudza. It is reported that this group of NATO soldiers was destroyed by Russian Spetsnaz Vulcan. Later, it turned out that it was a NATO assault team, consisting of 20 Polish soldiers and officers. By the way, the Russian military noted that, unlike American, British, Canadian, French, and German soldiers, many Poles refused to wear the uniform of the Ukrainian army. According to General Avdiy Alatonov, due to the heavy losses of the Ukrainian army and manpower, NATO generals are forced to send their assault teams to the Kursk region in an attempt to seize the initiative. However, unfortunately for NATO, all these attempts are largely unsuccessful.
Zelensky has put out as a possibility that his country can cede territory to Russia temporarily in exchange of a NATO umbrella over the territory that Ukraine still holds. Now, in an interview with Sky News, the Ukrainian president suggested that to stop the war and efforts to reach ceasefire, Kiev could diplomatically negotiate the return of the territory in the east that is currently under Russian control.
But if we want to stop the hot stage of the war, we should take under NATO umbrella the territory of Ukraine that we have under our control. That's what we need to do fast. And then Ukraine can get back the other part of its territory diplomatically.
The comments represent a considerable shift in his position. Kiev has previously said that it would continue to fight Russia until Ukraine returned to its internationally recognized borders, which includes Crimea, as well as the 4 regions annexed in 2022. That is Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia. And now Ukraine has opened itself to other security guarantees to achieve peace. But nonetheless, this proposition is highly theoretical. As Zelensky pointed out, no one has yet made such an offer. Whether NATO will ever consider such a move is in doubt, because like Zelensky said, NATO will need to offer membership to the whole country, and that includes those parts that is currently under Russian control.
Yes, it could be possible, but no one offered. But the invitation must be given to Ukraine within its internationally recognized border. You can't give invitation to just one part of a country. Why? Because thus you would recognize that Ukraine is only that territory of Ukraine and the other one is Russia.
Zelensky has maintained his position that NATO should immediately cover the part of Ukraine that remains under its control. That would be a guarantee that Putin does not return even when a ceasefire has been called. Now, talks of a possible ceasefire or peace deal have ratcheted up since Donald Trump won the U.S. presidential election earlier this month with a promise to end the war on his first day in office. All right, now to discuss more, we're being joined by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis from Sterling, Virginia. He is a military expert and host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Thank you so much for taking out your time and joining us. I would like to begin by asking you, President Zelensky has said that he will agree to give the territories occupied by Russia temporarily, and he has suggested that the parts of Ukraine under his control should be taken under the NATO umbrella to try and stop the, as he phrases it, hot phase of the war. How realistic do you think it is, and how different is it from a NATO membership?
Listen, we just got to be frank. There's no chance for this at all. It's too late for this kind of a deal. I mean, Russia has all the cards in its favor. Everything is trending towards a Russian military victory. And if there's going to be any negotiations, probably the entry point will be what Putin was talking about last June when he said it would be all four of the areas that he had annexed in 2022, and he wouldn't even consider anything less. And that means they have to give up even more territory than they have right now. And that also requires no NATO membership at all. And Russia is not in any kind of position to give in to something that Ukraine wants like this, because that's the reason they went to war in the first place, was NATO coming into Ukraine. So I can understand why Zelensky's trying to make a deal at the last minute, but I frankly think it's too little, too late.
Right. Now, let's also take the other side. Now, Donald Trump has tapped in Keith Kellogg to serve as a special envoy for the conflict. Now, Kellogg's plan, as reports say, involves freezing the battle lines at their prevailing locations and forcing both Kiev and Moscow to the negotiating table. Now, we know that President Zelensky has now proposed this deal. How do you think will U.S. interfere?
Well, listen, I think that all of these plans are missing a huge component. They're not even considering the Russian side of this. They're not considering just the plain battle realities on the ground. And when he says that when the Kellogg plan says to force Russia into negotiations, based on what? Because you have to have leverage in order to force somebody into a situation. And right now we have no leverage. Vladimir Putin has all the leverage because he has all of the combat power and all the things that go into making combat power, and especially manpower, that Ukraine doesn't have. So somebody's got to come up with some kind of a rational reason why Russia would be willing to negotiate a deal that's not in its favor when it has all the power. And frankly, I don't see any hope of that. But listen, we also got to understand the context. Just days ago, Putin said that they are now going to target potentially serious issues in Kiev as a result of the last long-range tests. So that's why I say I think this is coming kind of late. And I think the next thing Russia's going to do is to respond to that last round of long-range missiles being fired into it. And this whole conversation could change quickly.
Right. Now that you mentioned, of course, the Russian side as well, how urgent do you think Zelensky, because we know that he seems anxious putting out his plan, what could be the next step from Zelensky's side?
Well, listen, I mean, I don't think anything short of an admission that the entry point was going to be from the June 2024 offer that Russia put on the table. I think if he's not willing to even start there, then I don't think that Russia's even going to begin conversations with him. And again, they're still promising to respond based on the last round and based on the missile that has been going on in the last like 24 hours. I think they're going to continue to ratchet up this pressure. So I believe you say, what's his next move? If he's not willing to start where Russia was in June, I don't think that they're going to respond to this at all, and will instead just continue on methodically with their military operations.
And that means, well, that seems to be the Zelensky does not really have much time, because like we know that Trump, he is looking forward and saying that he will end the war in one day. But what is the move from U.S. side then?
Well, listen, I mean, you've mentioned it before. A lot of people in the United States are talking about this Kellogg plan and what Trump's going to do, et cetera. But these all suffer from the same problem: is that they're ignoring the Russian side of this, as though all the ground truth realities aren't there. And listen, the Ukraine side is losing rapidly. They're losing like scores of square kilometers every single week. The pace is increasing. These last rounds of missiles have almost knocked out a lot of the energy infrastructure, especially the heating capacity for Ukraine, and they don't have anything to stop it. So first of all, the West has to acknowledge there is an accelerating war on the Russian side, and things are getting worse and worse for Ukraine. I just haven't heard enough of the reality being in part of our thinking.
Right, absolutely. Let's see how it progresses. But thank you so much for coming on the show and giving your perspective on this.
Always my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Dangerous moment. There is a very real possibility of nuclear war, and numerous studies by scientific experts have estimated that if large numbers of nuclear weapons were to be used, it would probably mean the death of the vast majority of humanity in nuclear winter, as billions of people starve to death. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which is a watchdog group that was created in 1945 by Albert Einstein, Robert Oppenheimer, and the scientists who helped to create atomic weapons in the Manhattan Project. This group maintains what's known as the Doomsday Clock, and every year they update their warnings as to the possibility of nuclear war. And in 2024, they warned that we are at a moment of historic danger, which they estimated is 90 seconds to midnight. And why did these nuclear scientists warn that we're in such a dangerous moment? Because of the war in Ukraine, which is a proxy war between NATO and Russia. And of course, NATO is led by the United States. And the US and Russia have the largest reserves of nuclear weapons on Earth. And these nuclear scientists warned that the doomsday clock is, quote, the closest to global catastrophe it has ever been, end quote. They also warned that, quote, humanity continues to face an unprecedented level of danger, end quote. Now, while nuclear scientists are warning of the very real danger of nuclear war, what is the US military doing? Well, of course, it's providing billions of dollars of weapons and military support to Ukraine. But the US military is also researching the potential impact of a nuclear war on Russia. I'm not joking. I wish this were a joke, but this is absolutely real. Before me here, I'm looking at the website sam.gov. This is where companies can find opportunities for contracts with the US government. It's all publicly listed information. And this September, sam.gov published a contract titled Services for Modeling the Effects of Nuclear Weapons on Agricultural Systems. It discloses that the US Army Corps of Engineers is awarding a contract for research and development of a program that consists of, quote, modeling the effects of nuclear weapons on agricultural systems, end quote. And this is using software called AgriShock, which it notes models the effects of nuclear weapons on agriculture systems. And the study must, quote, demonstrate modeling of nuclear warfare on a global scale that would lead to destruction of the agricultural systems such as farms, end quote. And this modeling must include former Eastern Bloc countries, with bloc spelled wrong, and it also must include regions beyond Eastern Europe and Western Russia. So the US military wants to know what would be the impact of a nuclear war with Russia, not only in Eastern Europe, but in the entire world, what would be the impact on global food systems? Well, we actually already have an academic study that was published that answers this question. This was a study published in 2022 by leading scholars at universities around the world, led by Rutgers University, which is actually based in the US. And what was their conclusion? I'm reading here from the Rutgers University website. Nuclear war would cause a global famine and kill billions. It notes more than 5 billion people would die of hunger following a full-scale nuclear war between the US and Russia, according to a global study led by Rutgers climate scientists. The scientists found that if there were a full-scale US-Russia nuclear war, global average caloric production would decrease about 90% 3 or 4 years after the conflict. And just 2 years after the start of the nuclear war, more than 75% of the entire planet would be starving. This peer-reviewed study was published in the leading scientific journal Nature in 2022. It has 10 co-authors who are some leading scientists around the world in multiple countries. And I'm reading here from the abstract in this scientific paper. Atmospheric soot loadings from nuclear weapon detonation would cause disruptions to the Earth's climate, limiting terrestrial and aquatic food production. It would lead to mass food shortages in almost all countries. And they estimated that if there were a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, more than 2 billion people could die. But if there were a nuclear war between the US and Russia, more than 5 billion people could die, which of course is the majority of the world's population. And by the way, I should point out that many other academic studies have come to the same conclusion. This has been known about for decades. On the US National Library of Medicine website, this is a US government-backed institution, they have an academic study published in the 1980s about nuclear winter, reviewing the many scientific studies on this issue that details how a major exchange of nuclear weapons could result in a significant contamination of a large portion of the Earth's atmosphere, leading to a nuclear winter in which billions of people die. This is not new. I mean, there are so many movies about this. But clearly, the US military didn't like the conclusion of those studies, which is why it's offering a multi-million-dollar contract to do modeling so it can get a different response, maybe a response that it likes to hear about the possibility of nuclear war on Russia. We are in a very, very dangerous situation with the warmongers in Washington and in the Pentagon who are hell-bent on trying to defeat Russia, to overthrow the Russian government. And the danger only escalated further in November when the Biden White House gave permission to Ukraine for the first time to use US-supplied long-range missiles to launch attacks deep inside Russian territory. And immediately after Washington gave this permission to Kiev, Ukraine did launch attacks deep inside Russian territory. And the only reason that Ukraine can do this is because the United States is providing the long-range missile systems and the missiles themselves, and the US has trained Ukrainian soldiers on how to use these weapons. So the US is massively escalating this war. Now, this comes at a time when many Western media outlets are saying very clearly that Ukraine has been losing and is on the verge of defeat. The average age of Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines is between 43 and 45 years old. And even CNN has admitted the situation is very dire. CNN is, of course, as pro-Ukrainian and anti-Russian as a media outlet gets. And it reported that there is very low morale in the Ukrainian military. There are mass desertions happening, and thousands of soldiers are simply disobeying orders in Ukraine. And in past situations like this, when one side of the war is very clearly losing, that side often becomes very desperate, And that's why Ukraine is invading Russian territory, trying to launch long-range missile attacks inside Russia. These are signs of desperation, and they're very dangerous because they make the possibility of escalation into nuclear war more likely. Now, I've previously done reports here that look at how the majority of people in the United States and also in many European countries want peace talks to end the proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. A poll published in June found that 94% of people in the US and 88% of people in Western Europe say that NATO member countries should push for a negotiated settlement for the war in Ukraine. Although I should point out that this study was conducted in a very strange way. So they allowed multiple answers. That's why it was 94%, but the total sums to actually over 130%. But regardless, the point is that the majority of people want peace, but the supposedly democratic governments in the West are not actually responding to what their people want. Instead, they are escalating this war and talking about the potential use of nuclear weapons, which is absolutely insane. In fact, the New York Times reported in August that the Biden administration has ordered U.S. military forces to prepare for potential coordinated nuclear confrontations, not only with Russia, but also with China and North Korea. We are living in a madhouse. According to the New York Times, President Biden personally approved this plan in March. It's called the Nuclear Employment Guidance Strategy. And the Times says that this, quote, seeks to prepare the United States for possible coordinated nuclear challenges from China, Russia, and North Korea, end quote. This also came after Reuters reported in June that a top Biden administration official raised possible increased deployments of U.S. strategic nuclear weapons. This report cited the top U.S. national security arms control official who said that the U.S. may deploy more strategic nuclear weapons in coming years in the name of so-called threats posed by Russia, China, and other adversaries. He said, quote, absent a change in adversary arsenals, we may reach a point in the coming years where an increase from the current deployed numbers is required. And he added, if that day comes, it will result in a determination that more nuclear weapons are required to deter our adversaries, end quote. And the US government is also spending more and more money on nuclear weapons, tens of billions of dollars per year. In the last budget introduced by the Obama administration for 2017, it allotted $34 billion for nuclear weapons. That number drastically increased under Trump. In Trump's 2019 budget, it was $40 billion for nuclear weapons. In his 2021 budget, it was $48 billion for nuclear weapons. And under Biden, it has continued growing rapidly. For Biden's 2023 budget, there were $53 billion allotted to nuclear weapons. And for the 2025 budget, it increased drastically to $69 billion for nuclear weapons. By the way, this is according to the data that was compiled by the excellent researcher Stephen Semler, who has a really good Substack called Polygraph that you should check out. And he monitors how the US government has been funding the war in Ukraine, funding Israel, and has a lot of other very useful charts. He also showed how the US Congress has authorized $123 billion in military support for Ukraine between 2022 and 2024. In just 3 years, $123 billion of US military aid for Ukraine, which, by the way, is more than the total US military aid provided to Afghanistan in 20 years. This is how dangerous this arms buildup is and this proxy war against Russia is. And specifically, in terms of US spending on nuclear weapons, Columbia University Center for Nuclear Studies estimated that over 30 years, the US government will be spending $1.2 trillion on nuclear weapons. And that was in 2017 dollars. If you adjust for inflation, that means that in the next 3 decades, the US government plans to spend $1.56 trillion with the TR, trillion, on nuclear weapons, which, if were used, would destroy humanity and kill the vast majority of people on Earth. And what's so crazy about this is that for the warmongers in Washington, they complain that this is not enough. So the conservative think tank, the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, which is funded by the weapons industry and many big corporations, they complained that even $1 trillion is not enough spending for the US military. They want more spending on the military and more spending on nuclear weapons in particular. Now, I've talked about how the Biden administration has escalated the extreme danger of potential nuclear war, and the Democratic Party is deeply involved in this warmongering. But I should point out that this is completely bipartisan in Washington, that many Republicans are pushing for the same, and former President Donald Trump is just as guilty for this very dangerous situation that we're in. I need to emphasize this because some of Trump's supporters claim that the proxy war in Ukraine is a war created by the Democrats. But in reality, Trump and the Republicans also bear a lot of responsibility. This is completely bipartisan, like most of the worst crimes committed by the US empire. Let's not forget that when Trump was president in 2019, he boasted of withdrawing from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, that was signed between the US and the former Soviet Union, which opened up Pandora's box and basically started a new nuclear arms race. When this happened in 2019, even British state media, the BBC, which is very anti-Russian, was very concerned about how dangerous this decision was by Trump. The BBC noted that Trump's decision to withdraw from the INF Treaty raised fears of a new arms race, which is exactly what happened. It was entirely predictable. Now, for people who don't know, the INF Treaty had been signed in 1987 when the Soviet Union was still in power. And this was between Ronald Reagan, the arch-conservative Cold Warrior, and also the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. And this banned missiles with ranges between 500 and 5,500 kilometers. And the idea was to try to prevent a nuclear war between the US and the former Soviet Union and now Russia. But Trump completely destroyed that agreement. As if that weren't enough, a year later in 2020, Trump withdrew from another agreement with Russia, which was the Open Skies Treaty. This had been agreed to in 1992, so after the Soviet Union was overthrown, between the Clinton administration and then Russian leader Boris Yeltsin. And the idea of the Open Skies Treaty is it allowed aerial surveillance in both countries to make sure that the US wasn't preparing for war on Russia and Russia wasn't preparing for war. That agreement was sabotaged by the Trump administration. He destroyed all of the Cold War era arms treaty infrastructure that was aimed at trying to prevent nuclear war between the US and Russia. And meanwhile, as Trump was tearing up all of these arms treaties with Russia, he was also approving the sale of lethal weapons to Ukraine that even Obama, who had started the war in Ukraine by backing a coup against Ukraine's democratically elected government in 2014, even Obama had said that he would only send so-called non-lethal weapons to Ukraine, which aggravated the conflict. But Trump further escalated it by sending lethal weapons to Ukraine, which he knew would be used to fight against Russia. And then Trump did an interview in which he boasted that he had sent lethal weapons to Ukraine, whereas Obama only sent Ukraine pillows.
You don't know what I talked about with Putin in the meeting prior to the press conference.
Publicly. You never say anything harsh about him
Excuse me, I
publicly.
didn't. I'm the one that gave Ukraine offensive weapons and tank killers. Obama didn't. You know what he sent? He sent pillows and blankets.
The reason I mention all of this important historical context is that a lot of Trump supporters are acting like that now he won the 2024 presidential election and is coming back to the White House in January 2025. They claim that he's going to immediately bring peace to the world. He's going to end the war in Ukraine. But in reality, if you look at Trump's record in his first administration, he actually massively escalated tensions with Russia. This is bipartisan. So the point is that both political parties in Washington and the military industrial complex, the Pentagon, the State Department, all have played a role in bringing us to this very dangerous situation where they're talking about nuclear war, despite the fact that scientific experts warn that a nuclear war between the US and Russia would lead to the death of the majority of people on planet Earth. I mean, I don't know what to say. I can't think of anything more dangerous than that. Sometimes I really do feel like the world is an insane asylum, but that's why I created Geopolitical Economy Report to highlight these very important issues that unfortunately are not getting enough attention. Mainstream corporate media outlets are not taking this issue seriously enough. And in Washington, many warmongers are just flippantly talking about the possibility of nuclear war as if it's not a big deal, as if nuclear winter is not a possibility when it very much is. So on that note, I'm going to conclude here. I'm Ben Norton. This
all of a sudden, the Israeli media is publishing more polls in Israel showing how many Israelis are in favor of a ceasefire in Gaza now, including right-wing media that is aligned with and blindly supports Benjamin Netanyahu. Recent polls show that 71% of Israelis now support a ceasefire with Gaza, up from the 61% that was published a few days ago. These things indicate that Israel is indeed looking to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. The reasons for that are primarily the grave defeat that the genocide army has suffered both in Gaza and Lebanon, despite many attempts to cover up that failure with aggression, mass crimes, and genocide against the Palestinian and Lebanese people through ethnic cleansing campaigns, war crimes, barbarisms, and atrocities beyond any human imagination. Now, that's the main reason, really and truly. The main reason is the armed resistance facing Israel. If there is no armed resistance, you can say goodbye to both Palestine and Lebanon. The only thing keeping these areas alive are the armed resistance, primarily. Then, of course, the solidarity, the steadfastness of the people, and then, of course, we have the supporting fronts in the form of, well, Lebanon initially, and then we had Yemen, support from Syria, support from Iraq, and of course from the state of resistance, Iran. There are also other things to do with this move towards a ceasefire from Benjamin Netanyahu, who went and escalated in Lebanon to reach a ceasefire in Lebanon, climbed down the ladder, and set a new precedent, primarily when it comes to his main obstacles to a ceasefire in his government, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. And now he is talking more about a prospect of a ceasefire in Gaza. There's something else, though. There have been reports being published lately that, contrary to some assumptions previously, that Donald Trump actually did not want Benjamin Netanyahu to reach ceasefire before he is in office in the end of January 2025. But that actually, no, Donald Trump wants him to end this before he comes to office, because he does not want to deal with it when he comes to office. Again, how valid are these reports? We haven't had clear verification, but again, with the talks that happen between leaders of countries and certain officials' leaks, you might have certain things that could be genuine. But fact of the matter is, we are having more talk, and not only that we are having more talk in Israel, we are having more confirmations coming from Israel that the ceasefire that will be coming will be a submission to the Palestinian resistance, despite all of the coatings that they want to put on it. How? Well, the Palestinian resistance has 5 red lines: ending the war, getting all the people back to where they came from in Gaza, allowing all aid in, rebuilding, and having a just prisoner swap. And we're still having talks even in Israel about emptying the Israeli prisons from Palestinian prisoners who are being tortured. Now, that was there from the days after the temporary ceasefire ended, because Hamas, leading these negotiations, did not want to put the Palestinians in the same circle that they were in before, with uncertainty and giving Israel an opportunity to have a war again. The thing that they added later on, though, is something very interesting that we spoke about at the time: the addition of more mediators. Who are these mediators? Russia, China, and Turkey. We already spoke about the involvement of Turkey in the negotiation towards the ceasefire in Gaza over a week ago, with a delegation from the Israeli Shabak visiting Turkey to discuss the ceasefire in Gaza. That is after Turkey publicly declared that they're cutting ties with Israel. And now we also have a confirmation that Russia is indeed now involved. This was a report in the Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv. On the way to an agreement, they asked the new Russian card in the kidnap deal. This is indicating direct Russian involvement. How? Following the demands of Hamas, because Russia wasn't in the picture. Israel and the United States did not want Russia in the picture. Russia is a side that is openly supporting Iran, who's backing, the primary backer of the resistance. They have drills with Hezbollah in Iran, and they have great levels of coordinations with them. So how comes all of a sudden they're accepting this now? This is because Hamas demanded that, and now they realize they need to submit to the will of the Palestinian resistance to reach a deal, because all of their crimes and war crimes and acts of barbarism in Gaza, to try and force the Palestinian people and the Palestinian resistance to kneel down, have been unsuccessful and failed miserably. They said in Israel it is estimated that the only party in contact with all or most of the organizations holding the hostages is Iran. They're trying to justify the involvement of Russia. Therefore, Russia is seen as a possible mediator who can promote the issue in front of the Revolutionary Guards. All of a sudden, now they remembered that Russia has some sort of leverage when it comes to Iran. Well, just recently, you asked Russia to have leverage with Syria and Hezbollah, didn't you? They said, Ron Dermer, well, he was in Moscow, and he asked the Russians to help them stop channeling weapons from Syria, and look at how that's linked with what's happening now in Syria. Stop allowing Syria to pass and channel weapons to Hezbollah, and you don't have to make it obvious. You don't have to declare it. The only thing you have to do is just do it. No declarations so that you're not viewed in a negative manner. Russia responded immediately. No, that's beyond our role. That's beyond our military role in Syria, and Syria is entitled to do whatever it wants with its weapons, and that's none of our business. Straight out no. So how comes now you're trying to do something with them with Gaza if they just gave you a rejection when it comes to another favor when you directly spoke with them? It doesn't make sense, does it? But again, this is a demand from the Palestinian resistance, and therefore Israel is adhering to the Palestinian resistance and including Russia. According to estimates in Israel, Hamas has difficulty locating the whereabouts of some of the abductees. Okay, a bit of propaganda. Something could be true to an extent when it comes to Hamas losing connection with some of their people holding the Israeli prisoners of war. I mean, they confirmed that once or twice, especially when they declared that some of the Israeli prisoners of war have been killed due to Israeli strikes on locations they were held in. Most recently, the Israeli in North Gaza, again indicating that they still have prisoners in North Gaza. That's something that should be alarming to everyone in Israel. The fact that you have Israeli prisoners of war in an area that is facing ethnic cleansing and continued bombardment with the genocide general's plan to ethnically cleanse the population of North Gaza, as confirmed by none other than the ex-chief of staff of Israel, Moshe Ya'alon, Bogi Ya'alon. He said that in an interview with Democrat TV in Israel. And then, of course, people started to criticize him. People in Israel, in the military establishment, are saying our country is committing an ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Yet some of the people have the audacity to question the fact that we are talking about a genocide in Gaza. They added also, in light of Trump's victory and alongside the ongoing dialogue with Moscow regarding the non-transfer of IDF through the Syria-Lebanon border, the idea that has already been discussed in the past came back in the ongoing talks that Israel mediate between Moscow and Washington the issue of ending the war between Russia and Ukraine and improving relations between Russia and the United States on. Thus, in return, Russia will distance itself from Iran. Again, claims, nothing substantiated here. Also, Israel sees Russia as a factor capable of contributing and influencing the return of the abductees. Didn't you know that from day one, Israel, when you still had all of your prisoners of war alive and before you started bombarding everyone, trying to kill all of your prisoners of war through an implementation of the Hannibal Directive to reduce the cost that the Palestinian resistance is asking from you? And now you realize that you are unable to kill all of them because simply some of them are in certain locations that you cannot reach 1 year, 2 months into the war. Did they realize that just now? Do we believe that they realized that just now? Of course not, but we have seen failure after failure. Now they're trying to convince us that that's the reason that they are speaking with Russia, not the fact that this was a Palestinian demand. Turkey, Russia, and China, guarantors for a ceasefire agreement because they do not trust the American side, which is a direct contributor. And when I say Americans, you know what I mean, the American administration, before anyone starts to get offended. Of course, not the American people, especially the brave American people standing up for human rights and against these war criminals. They continued, we will remind you that this is after the ceasefire in the north came into effect, and now the pressure is increasing to reach an agreement to end the fighting in the Gaza Strip as well. Again, indicating that there is more internal pressure coming from Israel, and not just internal pressure, because it has always been there to an extent. It's the confirmation from Netanyahu himself that the situation is now ripened to reach a ceasefire. Now Benjamin Netanyahu is under double pressure. The Biden administration wants to record another political achievement before the end of his term, and the president-elect Donald Trump is also sending a message that he prefers to start the term when Israel's war with Hamas is over and there is no need to deal with the complicated issue. They're reporting this here, and again that could give Donald Trump a bit of support and backing, because he was promising everyone that I'm going to end the war, I'm going to end all wars. and there is confidence coming from him about ending the war in Russia. Now, even Zelensky is saying we are willing to give up territories in return for NATO membership. But the fact of the matter is, Zelensky is openly admitting that he's willing to give up territories to Russia. So a big chunk of it is now already declared from Zelensky himself. Egypt entered the picture at the same time. The pressures also exist inside the house. Senior officials of the Israeli security establishment believe that the Syrians in the north paved the way for an agreement with Hamas. The members of the negotiating team expressed themselves this way, among other things, during the last meeting of the political security cabinet on the eve of the approval of the settlement in the north. However, for now, Hamas does not show, at least not openly, signs of breaking or flexing regarding the terms of the deal. This is another confirmation that Hamas's conditions that represent the Palestinian resistance, conditions that represent the will of the Palestinian people in their majority in Gaza, are solid, are rock solid, and haven't shifted. And no amount of pressure in Israel is changing any of that. And that's being confirmed now in Israel as a done deal. And we're seeing steps to get there. And continues to demand, that's Hamas, to end the war in return for the return of the abductees. And again, they're mentioning Saudi reports that speak about the Egyptian proposal that included similar agreements happening between Gaza and Israel to the agreement that happened between Lebanon and Israel, with the management and agreement happening in the north with Russian mediation, again to justify Russian involvement in the mediation. All of that is stating that there are indeed advancements when it comes to the ceasefire. Now, mind you, talks and moves and reports about a genuine prospect to reach a ceasefire, not how solid that ceasefire would be, not how long will that ceasefire last, not talks about the ultimate solution for the Palestinian cause and everything is fine now. No, just talks about reaching a ceasefire for the current conflict that we have been having since the Israeli genocide began following the Al-Aqsa flood operation that Hamas started alongside the Palestinian resistance on the 7th of October. This is what we're talking about, and indeed, there is progress there.
Strange and odd news stories, and as always, let's go ahead and get right into today's video. Now, as somebody who is part Native American, by a good amount too, different tribes, Cherokee, Nanacote, Lenni Lenape, you will hear a lot of mottos, a lot of sayings, a lot of expressions in my family. One of my favorite sayings actually came from my grandfather. When everybody started to get rowdy, when everybody wanted to be right, he would stand up and say, everybody wants to be the chief, but nobody wants to be the Indian. So many chiefs and not enough Indians. Everybody wants to be right. And that actually brings me to today's segment in today's video. So something happened above Capitol Hill. There are these lights seen above Capitol Hill, and people think these lights are one of three things. They think these are either drones, they think they are UFOs, or they think they are spotlights reflecting into the sky. Now, if you have been rocking with me for quite some time now, you will know my take on UFOs and aliens. You'll know my opinion. So I really don't have to give my opinion here. But we do have channels talking about this. And again, they are saying that this is proof of UFO alien activity. We even have some channels talking about this could be the startup Project Bluebeam. But we do have some channels that are doing their damnedest to try to debunk what we're seeing here. That is one of the major problems here when it comes to debunking something like this and leading people astray. So we have certain channels that are showing this one picture, and they are saying that this matches with what's reflecting in the sky, the lights reflecting in the sky. But they are leaving out the video. This video records the orbs at a distance, and it shows the orbs moving and blinking in and out and doing things that won't match the spotlights in the ground. So you have to ask yourself, why are channels who are trying to debunk these lights leaving out the video?
Ooh, family.
Now, there's nothing wrong with being a skeptic. Like I've said before, I promote a healthy level of skepticism on this channel. There's nothing wrong with asking questions or giving your theory. What I mean by promoting a healthy level of skepticism, yes, I'll believe what I believe. Like, for instance, those shadow things that fly throughout the sky, I believe there's some kind of demon or entity, but you could believe there's something
No
else
doubt about it.
altogether, and I will hear you
Lord.
out. Even if you believe there's some kind of bug and you make a good point about it, I'll say, yeah, you make a good point, and you may even change my mind altogether on what they could be. But again, if you are going to flat out debunk something and say that other people are flat out wrong, you have to show the whole picture. When we look at the video itself shows us that these are not lights reflecting from the ground like in that picture. These are orbs flying in the sky or some type of flying object. Yes, they could be helicopters. Yes, they could be drones, or they could be UFOs. I mean, just look at the one orb going way above the others. That'll tell you right there that this is not those lights reflecting in the sky. So when you go back to your favorite channel and they're trying to debunk this with the photo, just ask them, why did you leave out the video? Another good question would be, why is this the first time people are seeing these lights over Capitol Hill and acting like they are brand new? If these lights were in the ground on Capitol Hill and they were reflecting in the sky, wouldn't we see a lot of photos and videos throughout time of people saying that there are UFOs over Capitol Hill? But no, this is one of the very first times that we are hearing about this. Just my take on the subject anyway. But going back to all these sightings, no matter if they are unidentified flying objects, they are drones, they are orbs, no matter what they are, we are hearing a lot and seeing a lot about these flying objects, not just from the public, but also from the government as well. It would seem like almost every other day, the government is telling the public that they are seeing these unidentified drones flying over Air Force bases. No matter if it's in the United Kingdom or somewhere else in the world or in the United States, they are seeing these unidentified drones in high frequency. But in my last video, I did go ahead and ask the question, why is the government refusing to bring these drones down? This is a time during high conflict, and these drones are flying in unauthorized military airspace. So is it the fact that they can't bring these drones down? Or is it that they know what these drones are and they serve another purpose? Because I remember that story that came out where everybody wanted to rush Area 51. Everybody wanted to go to Area 51 to uncover the secrets. And the government came out and said, you can come if you want to, but we'll bust some caps in you. They actually said that. They said they'll turn you into Swiss cheese if they catch you stepping foot onto the grounds of Area 51. So again, why are they just letting these unidentified drones flying freely over military Air Force bases? So with the rise of these orbs, these unidentified drones, these flying objects, it really makes me wonder, is there something to this whole December 3rd, 2024? Now, if you're not aware of what's supposed to happen on December 3rd, 2024, there is an individual named Cliff High. Cliff High invented a Weebot algorithm, which was supposed to predict stocks, help him with stocks. Back in 2009, this computer algorithm, this computer application said that Donald Trump would be featured on the Joe Rogan podcast. 39 days from that podcast, there will be this great UFO military conflict in the skies. So back in 2009, I don't believe Joe Rogan had his podcast, or if he did, it wasn't as popular as it is today. And of course, back in 2009, Donald Trump was not running for president, Well, flash forward to today, Donald Trump has won the presidency again. He was featured on the very popular Joe Rogan podcast. 39 days from when he was featured on that podcast will be December 3rd, 2024. So a lot of people do believe there is something to this whole algorithm prediction. Like I said, there will be this great conflict between UFOs and the military. And once this happens, these entities, they'll make themselves known and they'll basically blend in with humanity. The only problem is, even though a lot of people are talking about this on TikTok, social media, and so forth, the only problem happens to be there is no proof of any of this. There are no photos or videos of this Weebot prediction. I can't even find Cliff High talking about this prediction where Donald Trump will be on the Joe Rogan podcast. Then 39 days later, there will be this UFO military battle. From what I understand anyway, this whole discussion was started by a very popular YouTuber named Keemstar. So where did he get this information on Cliff High? But on the flip side, we are just seeing a lot of unidentified objects, unidentified flying objects, like that one object in Manchester Airport. And we're seeing all these orbs, and we're constantly hearing the government talk about UFOs and aliens. They're constantly having these hearings. There has never been a time in history that they have been this open about the subject of UFOs and aliens and talking about them. Because it's so rampant, the whistleblowers, the government, the photos, the videos, it really makes me believe that something is coming. Whether this something is manufactured in the lab, Project Bluebeam style, or something really has crossed over, something's really coming either from the waters or from inside the earth. No matter where it's coming from, something big is coming. What may or may not be coming December 3rd just might very well be the start of Project Bluebeam. Now, I know you all hate hearing about the false stage alien invasion, but you have to remember the powers that be have a deadline. They have a 2030 agenda deadline. The United Nations and the World Economic Forum, they met in September to speed up the process of the 2030 agenda that is still on the table. This one world government, this one world religion, the one world policy. Think about it. Really think about it. There are entities. I really do think there are entities that do exist, whether they come from another dimension, they come from within the waters or within the earth. Again, hollow earth theory. They have to have been here for thousands of years. But the closer we get to the 2030 agenda, suddenly we have hostile entities that want to attack us. Look at the timing. Look at the timing of everything going on. We have all these conflicts between these countries, and we have the World Economic Forum pushing the 2030 agenda. And the 2030 agenda can only work if all these countries, all these people, all these governments are united. Well, how are they going to unite all these countries and these governments that are currently hostile with one another? Well, like Ronald Reagan said, you create a common enemy from outside this world. And suddenly, all these countries will put their differences aside and unite. Now, look, I really hate being a bubble burster, and we really want to believe the government when they tell us that UFOs and entities do exist. But you really have to use caution here, exercise caution, and look at the bigger picture of everything that is currently going on and everything that is to come. But with the ramp up of things being seen and things being spoken about, something is definitely coming. But thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see more, please subscribe. If you're already subscribed, please like, as any engagement does help the channel grow. Once again, thank you so much for your support.
Letting go of long-held beliefs is a significant challenge for fans of space exploration and beloved movie franchises like Star Wars and Star Trek, especially upon discovering that the entire concept of outer space is an elaborate, modern-day facade. I anticipate that the seemingly impossible assertions soon to be presented will be a bridge too far for most to venture. Although we will decisively expose and document the extent of deceit, fraud, manipulation, and duplicity orchestrated by this organization and its collaborating space agencies, many may still find it too challenging to even consider. We will evidence that NASA stands at the forefront of perpetuating the most diabolical deception in history. This elaborate deception has far-reaching consequences and implications, entangling us in false cosmologies, promises of future technologies, erroneous models of our Earth's true structure, and the alluring prospect of further space exploration that continues to captivate many today. Given that taxpayers provide $72 million each day to this enigmatic federal agency, we might naturally begin to wonder, what has NASA really brought us? Have you ever stopped to think about that? The gravity of the situation will deepen further when we realize we are channeling our taxpayer resources into an organization perpetrating a deception of staggering proportions from its inception up to present. We inadvertently fund it while being coaxed into wholeheartedly endorsing what is portrayed as a valiant exploration into the unknown. Since its inception, NASA has effectively dominated the entire narrative surrounding cosmology and our understanding of Earth and its structure. With ever-advancing technology, the agency has continued to further refine its methods to deceptively seduce the world at large. If there are any governmental bodies today that should be thoroughly investigated, audited, and held accountable for crimes against humanity, it must certainly be NASA and its international counterpart space agencies and affiliates. The upcoming revelations of fraud and deception will be difficult for most to acknowledge and come to terms with. Yet overcoming these obstacles is essential to navigating further through this deceitful maze to reach new levels of truth and enlightenment. This self-protecting conspiracy has captivated the worldwide population from inception up to present day. Awakening from this elaborate modern-day deception will be one of the most challenging endeavors imaginable for many when faced with the following revelations. This exploration will be difficult to accept, diverging entirely from the established account of our universe that we believe we currently understand today. These images express what I soon anticipate from most who continue ahead when initially presented with these uncomfortable assertions. I offer my deepest apologies to those who staunchly support NASA and believe in its declared mission of advancing space exploration. This extends to the established modern-day narratives of cosmology and a completely false structure of our Earth, which we have come to accept through NASA and collaborating space agencies worldwide. The information that follows will sharply challenge the core beliefs you have long held since childhood. It was only in the modern era, following the advent of NASA and the commencement of space exploration through rocketry, that the heliocentric model of our solar system was universally acknowledged as a scientific truth. This acceptance effectively dominated the timeless contention of the geocentric model, which had been the prevailing view across a diverse range of ancient societies, including the Sumerians, Egyptians, Babylonians, Hebrews, Greeks, Indians, Chinese, Mayans, Celts, Polynesians, Aztecs, Inca, scholars of the Islamic Golden Age, and medieval Europeans. The geocentric model is an astronomical concept that positions the Earth at the center of the universe. According to this model, all celestial bodies, including the sun, moon, planets, and stars, revolve around and over the Earth. The geocentric view asserts that the Earth is a fixed, immobile point in the universe, and that the apparent daily movements of the sky and celestial bodies is due to the rotation of the heavens around the Earth, rather than the Earth's rotation around its axis, as posited in the heliocentric model of today. The heliocentric model, an astronomical theory developed in the 16th century by Nicholas Copernicus, positions the Sun as the center of the solar system with Earth orbiting around it. This theory was further popularized by astronomers like Johannes Kepler and Galileo Galilei. It provided explanations for phenomena such as the apparent retrograde motion of planets and their varying brightness and speed in the night sky. This shift to a sun-centered model marked a significant transformation in scientific thought and laid the groundwork for modern astronomy as it is taught today. Abandoning the heliocentric model is essential to escaping the maze of misconceptions that have been deeply ingrained into our core educational framework from the beginning. Let us reflect again on the urgent push to indoctrinate the world with heliocentricity as the definitive truth, aimed at overshadowing any revelations that might leak over time from the discoveries in Antarctica. Had they been disclosed as discovered, these findings would have swiftly ended any contention between the geocentric model and the widely accepted heliocentric model of today. The motive to obscure discoveries in Antarctica contributed to the creation of NASA and the subsequent emphasis on space exploration. This push was primarily aimed at reinforcing belief in the heliocentric model and the concept of an infinite cosmos, thereby supporting the Big Bang theory and the idea of an ever-expanding universe. This initiative has significantly diminished the geocentric view of our universe, which is regarded as outdated and archaic by most today. The greatest deception of our time has been the conjuring of infinite space, said to extend indefinitely all around us, and a model of cosmology that starkly differs from our true reality. This false depiction serves to obscure the evidence of an originating event central to our existence and fundamental in shaping an accurate understanding of our true world. NASA has officially segmented the heavens with the following definitions. Low Earth orbit purportedly ranges from 100 to 1,200 miles up. Medium Earth orbit is said to lie between 1,200 and 22,236 miles, and high Earth orbit allegedly begins at 22,236 miles. We will prove these alleged altitudes entirely exaggerated and reveal the true boundaries of our enclosed world. The establishment of NASA could be seen as the cornerstone of a false narrative, a saga in which rockets serve as mere props on a stage, appearing to explore an infinite expanse that, upon closer look, reveals itself to be an expertly designed backdrop. Discovering that our world is a tightly enclosed system, indicative of deliberate creation, would send shockwaves through our collective understanding across the world. The concept of outer space, popularized since the mid-20th century, should be seen as a carefully crafted story, a fictional construct designed to shape a false and deceptive cosmology. In this narrative, NASA and its international counterparts serve as the guardians and stewards of space exploration fantasy, meticulously cultivating a deceptive narrative and agenda. Their purported framework, widely accepted and rarely questioned, has become the dominant narrative, effectively overshadowing any alternative interpretations that offer a vastly different view of Earth and cosmology. As defined by NASA, outer space refers to the vast expanse of the universe that lies beyond Earth's atmosphere and extends past low, medium, and high Earth orbit. It is a far distant region characterized by a vacuum, very little matter, and negligible gravitational attractions. The term implies a deep space characteristic of the cosmic void, far removed from Earth. We will scrutinize the domain of outer space, which space agencies claim to have explored and continue to investigate, an expanse claimed to have no known boundaries, reinforcing the existence of infinite space extending in all directions around us. We must critically examine and reject the many layers of misinformation that have justified allocating such an immense taxpayer budget to NASA. We have been led to believe that this funding is advancing the cause of space exploration. We should thoroughly investigate whether NASA represents a practical use of taxpayer dollars, or if it amounts to an excessive and opaque expenditure with unclear returns, and quite evidently founded on fraud from its inception. We must recognize that no space agency has ever traveled beyond low Earth orbit, nor have they ever achieved farcical landings on the Moon or the planet Mars, contrary to the myriad of fake images and videos provided to mislead the world. Once thoroughly examined, these very pieces of visual media clearly reveal their deceptive clues within themselves. Media fakery that is apparent even to the less discerning eyes of children. The seemingly endless array of retractions, contradictions, and inconsistencies involving NASA will quickly become apparent. A comprehensive examination of NASA's core credibility is crucial, as it clearly reveals the agency's expertise in crafting illusions and deceptions. This is all part of an effort to promote a completely fictitious cosmology, and even more alarmingly, to obscure the true structure of the Earth. Our journey will lead to the troubling acceptance of harsh new realities and truths, provided we can endure the unsettling information that follows. We can either reject the notion of a deception so vast it defies imagination or any glimpse of plausibility, or we can courageously recognize the disconcerting revelation of the countless illusions and fraud that have entangled us in our misled view of Earth and cosmology. I fully understand how challenging it is to step outside of one's comfort zone, as I have personally navigated the difficult journey to see beyond this grand deception, requiring many months to reconcile and accept the staggering psyop we have been enmeshed in from birth. In pursuit of truth, we will embark on an enlightening journey to uncover the deceptions that have long ensnared us. This path If I secretly placed a blue ball inside a wooden box, and then later I showed you the closed wooden box and said, "There's a blue ball inside this box," you could only believe or disbelieve me. You couldn't know for sure. Until I actually opened the box so that you could see for yourself, you wouldn't and couldn't know with certainty whether a blue ball, something else, or nothing at all was inside the box. This kind of hearsay is second-hand knowledge, which is simply a belief in someone else's claims, and is very different from first-hand knowledge. First-hand knowledge comes from direct personal experience. Once I opened the box, revealing the blue ball inside for you to see with your own eyes, then it would become first-hand knowledge, and no longer a belief. Now what if I secretly took a picture of the blue ball sitting inside the open wooden box, and then later I showed you the closed wooden box along with the photograph? In this instance, would you know that there is a blue ball inside the box? No. Once again, until I actually opened the box so that you could see for yourself, you wouldn't and couldn't know with certainty whether that picture was of a different box, if the ball was removed or replaced after the picture was taken, or if the picture was completely doctored and faked. Just like hearsay is belief in someone else's words, photos are belief in someone else's pictures. Both are second-hand sources of information, and neither can be known, only believed. So when NASA and the world's space agencies present us with pictures of a blue ball in outer space, or their astronauts tell us that Earth is a blue ball in outer space, do we know that to be true, or is it simply a belief? Without first-hand experience of seeing Earth from that vantage point, we cannot claim to know that Earth is a blue ball in outer space. We may choose to believe or disbelieve the words and pictures of the astronauts, but neither can be known without direct personal experience. Only a small handful of astronauts in history have claimed to have seen Earth from that vantage point, and the fact of the matter is that they could just as easily be lying as telling the truth. Likewise, the pictures supposedly taken by these astronauts could just as easily be fake as real. If we want to know something, we cannot rely on the pictures and testimonies of other people. Pictures and testimonies can only be believed, not known. So how can we endeavor to know, and not just believe, the true shape of the Earth? People and pictures can lie, but tangible substances and empirical demonstrations cannot. In your experience, the horizon is always horizontal, and sea level is always level. Still water remains flat across its surface and physically cannot show curvature or convexity upon its surface. The horizon rises to the eye level of the observer and remains flat 360 degrees around, regardless of altitude. Your every experience and every personal observation is always that of being upright on a level earth. You have never experienced being upside down or on the sides of a gigantic globe. Even if you believe Earth is a globe, in your experience, you know it to be flat. Likewise, you have never observed or experienced the supposed motion of the Earth. Except for maybe an earthquake or an avalanche, your every experience and personal observation is that of a completely motionless Earth. In your experience, the sun, moon, and stars are all moving overhead, but the Earth underfoot is still. Even if you believe Earth is moving, in your experience, you know it to be motionless. Over 2,500 years ago, the Buddha said, "Believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and common sense. To believe the pictures and testimonies of others over your own eyes and experience is a ridiculous relinquishment of discernment. It is a logical fallacy of appeal to authority and intellectually irresponsible. The very concept of belief is a weak epistemic function. Believing is what people do when they don't really know. Instead of admitting the truth, which is that they simply don't know, people often prefer to pick and choose various beliefs. But beliefs are antithetical to knowledge and become an impediment to its acquisition. If people accept that they don't know something, the mystery of the thing remains, and a curious, skeptical, critical mindset can flourish. If people instead choose to believe something that they cannot really know, it is nothing but self-induced delusion. Put simply, all beliefs overstep the bounds of attainable knowledge. Beliefs should be banished from your psyche. We should only be involved in knowing and not knowing. What people believe or don't believe is unimportant and irrelevant. What matters is what we know. And when we don't or can't know something, it's important to admit that to ourselves, rather than finding some comforting belief to replace it. And that is why so many people choose to blanket themselves in beliefs, rather than admitting the simple truth that they don't know. Because beliefs are comforting. It's uncomfortable to realize that you don't know the greatest mysteries of life, and it's much more comforting to pretend you do by adopting a belief system that provides answers to all those questions. Then, instead of being a perplexed detective analyzing life's mysteries, you become an egotistic evangelist preaching blind faith. This is why I find religious flat earthers to be a paradox and a problem. Many people who know that Earth is a level, motionless plane are also believers of various world religions. Since flat Earth is mentioned in the holy scriptures of Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and others, members of these religions often take this as proof positive that everything else mentioned in their holy scriptures must also be literally true. This is simply not the case, however, and all claims must be validated by their own merit. The fact of the matter is that flat Earth was the prevailing cosmology at the time when most of these holy scriptures were written, so it is no wonder that their worldview is reflective of that. Just because flat Earth is mentioned in the Bible, and flat Earth is true, doesn't mean that a man was born of a virgin and walked on water. It doesn't mean that snakes and burning bushes can talk, and it doesn't mean an ark could hold and feed tens of thousands of animals for months at a time. Believing these Bible testimonies of things we cannot prove or experience for ourselves is no different from believing the testimony of astronauts. In our experience, nobody has ever been born of a virgin or walked on water. Personally, we have never seen a snake or burning bush strike up a conversation. We may choose to believe or disbelieve in such things, but we cannot know them to be true. Therefore, when we are trying to awaken others to the reality of flat Earth, religious beliefs really shouldn't enter into the discussion. A flat, motionless Earth is objectively, observably, and empirically demonstrable and directly experienced by everyone. It doesn't require belief like the globe or religious scriptures. Flat Earth is backed by abundant evidence, experiments, and experience. And that is why people like myself don't just believe the Earth is flat, we know it is.
Perfect. Follow me.